Ned Stark stood at the end of the great hall in the Red Keep, sunlight streaming through tall windows that warmed the otherwise cold stone beneath his boots. He had spoken with the newly proclaimed King Joffrey that morning, measuring the boy's temperament. It was a dangerous prospect to continue playing this game in King's Landing, but honor demanded that he try. The realm depended on it. Robert Baratheon, the one true king Ned had ever served, lay rotting in his grave. Ned could not stomach the idea that the Seven Kingdoms would tear itself apart in a matter of months or even weeks if he did not find a way to mend what had been ripped asunder. So when a subtle whisper from his friend in the City Watch alerted him that Renly Baratheon and Stannis Baratheon both gathered forces in the south, Ned saw an opportunity. If the realm was to survive, the Baratheon brothers must not fight each other but stand united. And if a Stark had to bring them to the table, he would do so quietly and with unwavering resolve. He departed the Red Keep under cloak and shadows that same evening, accompanied by only a handful of trusted Northmen, men who, despite everything, would follow him to the ends of Westeros. The streets were rife with rumor. Not everyone believed Joffrey to be a rightful king, nor did they entirely trust the Lannisters, who seemed poised to rule by the boys' side. Tensions simmered, but Ned walked with steady steps, his presence rarely challenged due to the lateness of the hour. His men carried minimal sigils. It was best to remain unremarkable in these uncertain times. He remembered the promise he made to Robert on his deathbed to protect the realm and ensure the well-being of his children. Though Joffrey's parentage stood in question, he was still a boy and the realm was still in dire need of unity. Ned's heart grew heavy as he recalled the moment Robert pressed his hand and demanded that Ned serve as protector of the realm until Joffrey came of age, or until the truth of the lineage might be properly exposed. He rode under cover of darkness, out of King's Landing, bound southward. The first days were fraught with worry, for Cersei had more watchers than any queen consort ought to, and news traveled fast. If she learned Ned was en route to parley with both Stannis and Renly, the Lannisters would not sit idle. But he had little choice. Varys, the master of whisperers, had emerged from one of his secret passages to grant Ned a small measure of safe conduct, dropping cryptic hints about whispers traveling faster than ravens, but promising certain pathways that might lead Ned out of the city without immediate notice. And so Ned relied on the spider's cunning for once. He did not pretend to trust Varys, but in times of desperation, one makes allies where one can find them. They navigated minor roads at first, winding through small villages where peasants recognized neither Stark nor Lannister banners and slept in their saddles more often than in any welcoming bed. The nights grew darker the farther they went from the capital, and the few travelers they met had little to say beyond rumors of battle lines being drawn somewhere near Storm's End or perhaps in the Reach. Some whispered that Renly Baratheon had crowned himself king, claiming the hearts of chivalrous knights, while others insisted that Stannis, the eldest, had the rightful claim. Ned felt the weight of these words pressing against his chest. The realm did not need two new kings. It needed one strong Baratheon to stand in Robert's place. A single line of succession, or at least a single voice of authority. Perhaps that was too much to hope for, but Ned refused to abandon the dream. On a dreary morning, when the horizon was a pale line of silver under a leaden sky, Ned's small group reached a crossroads. One path led southeast toward Storm's End, the seat of House Baratheon and a place of storied resilience during Robert's rebellion. Another path traveled westward, deeper into the fertile fields near the Mandar, rumored territory of Renly's new alliance with House Tyrell. Scouts returning from the road reported that Stannis was said to be at Dragonstone, mustering ships and men loyal to him, but others claimed he might have landed near Storm's End to lay claim to it. It was impossible to know for sure. Ned sighed, mindful of how elusive the truth could become in times of war. Choosing caution, Ned steered his party toward Storm's End. If Stannis did hold it, perhaps they could find him. And if Renly tried to lay siege, Ned hoped to arrive before swords were drawn in earnest. For 2 days they traveled, halting only to water the horses or snatch a few hours' sleep. Occasional farms dotted the landscape, but more often, wide tracts of unsettled land stretched on, the green fields fading to dull gold under the heavy clouds. Each night, they sat around their small campfire, discussing strategy. Ned would attempt first to speak with Stannis, who, by law and lineage, had the strongest claim after Robert. But that conversation would not be pleasant. Stannis was not known for his warmth or his flexibility, and Ned had found him prickly even in better days. Yet the man was just, if stern. It might be possible to appeal to Stannis' sense of duty for the realm, especially if Ned could show that alliance with Renly was not just an option but a necessity. A fortnight into this journey, Storm's End's mighty ramparts finally came into view, towering on a promontory that jutted into the sea. The wind howled around them and storm clouds churned overhead as though the fortress itself summoned the tempest. Ned knew the place was near impenetrable, its walls smooth and curved to deflect siege engines, its defenses formidable since the days of Durin Godgrief. He led his men carefully along the main road, noting the lack of outward activity. No siege lines, no massed armies. Only a few banners fluttering atop the battlements. They depicted the crowned stag of Baratheon on a field of gold. But Ned could not discern if they bore the older design of Robert or something adapted for Stannis or Renly. With a certain dread tinging his heart, Ned spurred his horse to the gates. A dozen Baratheon guards in black and gold livery stepped forward, halberds lowered. Their captain asked Ned to name himself. Ned complied with steady courtesy, identifying himself as Eddard Stark of Winterfell, Lord Paramount of the North, and the man Robert Baratheon had named Protector of the Realm. The guard captain blinked, uncertain, but eventually recognized Ned's name and bearing. There was a moment of tense silence. Then the gates were opened, and one guard hurried inside the castle, presumably to alert whomever was in command. Ned entered Storm's End as warily as he had ever entered any fortress, aware that once inside, he could be easily contained or executed if the occupants so wished. He dismounted in the courtyard, scanning the surroundings for any sign of a trap. The thick walls hemmed him in, the sky above a swirling patch of gray. A lone figure approached, tall, lean, clad in black leather and draped in a thick cloak that snapped in the wind. When he drew near, Ned recognized that grim mouth and severe gaze. It was Stannis Baratheon. Ned offered a small bow, enough to show respect without groveling. Stannis nodded, lips set in a thin line, and then dismissed the guards with a curt wave. Only then did he address Ned, voice cutting through the wind. "Lord Stark, you have come a long way from King's Landing. What business brings you here?" Ned followed Stannis into a smaller hall off the main courtyard, where the thick walls muted the constant roar of the wind. The Lord of Dragonstone, if one still called him that, spoke little, his gaze assessing. Once inside, a torch lit the gloom, revealing a rough table scattered with maps of Westeros. A single high-backed chair stood near the table, with other smaller chairs along the walls. No servants scurried about, no grand feast awaited. Stannis had always been austere, but even by his standards, this was a spare reception. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Stannis motioned for Ned to speak. Ned explained. He believed that Robert's death, tragic though it was, had left the realm in chaos. There were rumors that Renly had declared himself king. Others said Stannis planned to do the same or already had. Ned wanted to prevent a war that would tear the kingdoms apart. The Lannisters were poised to make moves of their own, and if the Baratheon brothers fought each other, the only beneficiary would be the enemy, whoever it truly might be. Ned let the words hang in the air. Stannis glowered, jaw working. He replied that Joffrey was no true king, not the son of Robert but the product of incest between Cersei and Jaime Lannister. He had proof from Robert's bastards, from genealogical records, from the color of the boy's hair if one needed even that simple clue. Ned inclined his head, acknowledging the truth of it. But that did not solve their immediate crisis. If Stannis pressed his rightful claim, he would have to fight not only the Lannisters but also, possibly, his own brother Renly, who Ned had heard now wore a crown. Stannis's frown deepened, the corners of his mouth turning white with anger. He admitted Renly had appealed to him at first to join forces, but demanded terms that Stannis found insulting. "He wants me to bow to him, Ned," Stannis said in a quiet, bitter voice. "Me, his elder, rightful heir. I cannot bend." Ned took a slow breath, feeling the tension in the air. "If the realm is torn between two Baratheon kings, the Lannisters will pick us apart. It's not a matter of who has the better claim, my lord, but whether you wish to see the realm safeguarded. Is there no chance to speak with Renly? To find a compromise?" Stannis leveled a hard stare at Ned as though weighing whether to reveal something. The seconds crawled by. Then he murmured that he had tried once to speak sense into Renly, but Renly was young, charming, and convinced that the Stormlords and the Tyrells would flock to him over the older, sterner brother. "Yet you come all this way to broker peace?" Stannis asked, voice laden with skepticism. "You have always been an honorable man, Ned Stark. but you ask me to share power that is rightfully mine. I only ask that you listen, Ned replied gently, his voice echoing against the stone. Listen to reason. The realm needs strength, yes, but it also needs unity. If you and Renly present a single front, many who currently waver or pledge themselves to false kings would rally behind you both. The seat of House Baratheon would remain unassailable. Joffrey, if we can prove his parentage, would lose any claim. And the Lannisters would face a united realm. Stannis pressed his fingers to the table, glaring at a map of the Crownlands. Renly refuses to recognize my right. He sends letters calling himself the king in Highgarden or the king in the south. It's an insult. He is younger. The crown is mine by law and by the word of the gods. If we must come to blows, so be it. The realm will suffer less in the long run if the rightful king triumphs swiftly. Ned sighed, recalling that sense of rigid duty Stannis always carried. I beg you to wait, at least for a short while. Let me speak with Renly, see if there is a way to bridge this gap. Grant me that time as a favor to me, if not for your own sense of mercy. The word mercy twitched on Stannis' lips as though he considered it weakness. But Ned pressed on, if there's no hope, you can proceed, but once swords are drawn, it will be too late for words. You know that. Give me the chance to prevent more needless bloodshed. Robert would have wanted this. Stannis eyed Ned. Finally, he inclined his head, albeit stiffly. You have 1 fortnight, Ned Stark. I will not wait longer. My men are mustered. The lords of the Narrow Sea stand ready to proclaim me as king of Westeros. If you cannot secure Renly's cooperation in that time, I will march. That was the best Ned could hope for. He bowed in gratitude, concealing the relief that swept through him. I will depart at once. May the gods grant us the wisdom to avoid war. Stannis allowed Ned to rest a night within Storm's End, though the courtesy was minimal. Ned and his men slept in a small suite once reserved for minor courtiers, guarded by men loyal to Stannis' banner. At dawn, they departed swiftly, spurred by the knowledge that each hour's delay might bring the realm closer to civil war. Ned aimed westward now, heading toward the fertile lands rumored to be under Renly's banner. He had heard from travelers on the road that the Tyrell forces admired the younger Baratheon's charm and gallantry. Many knights of the Reach, lured by prospects of chivalric ideals, had bent the knee to Renly. It made sense, Ned supposed. Renly had always been well-liked, easier to approach. Stannis was flint and iron, while Renly was bright copper that glinted in the sunlight. The roads to the west proved more crowded. Men-at-arms wearing green and gold roamed the countryside in small patrols, their vigil reminding Ned that House Tyrell was not to be trifled with. Occasionally, they passed columns of wagons carrying grain and barrels of wine, supplies for an army, no doubt, or for some large gathering. The banners hung proudly, golden roses on fields of green, sometimes entwined with the crowned stag of Baratheon. It was a curious mix, and Ned wondered how Mace Tyrell had become so thoroughly invested in Renly's cause. Perhaps ambition for House Tyrell's future. Perhaps dissatisfaction with King's Landing. Whatever the reasons, it only intensified Ned's determination to stop a fight between Renly and Stannis. With the Tyrell host behind him, Renly could bring formidable force to bear against his brother's loyalists. The war would become a pitched nightmare. They rode on for 4 more days, halting to inquire at villages or from passing caravans. Several travelers pointed them to Bitterbridge, where a large camp had sprung up around an old fortress by the Mander. The rumors said Renly was feasting knights and lords alike, celebrating his newly claimed title. That notion made Ned's stomach churn, feasts and festivals while the realm teetered on the brink of war. But he also knew Renly's style. He believed in grand gestures, in winning hearts before battles even began. And hearts he had won, apparently in vast numbers. At length, Ned saw the banners first, a rising forest of green and gold set against the distant stone of the old keep at Bitterbridge. Tents sprawled, a sea of colors, with men and women milling about in bustling throngs. Horses whinnied, blacksmiths hammered, servants hurried with baskets of provisions. On a slight rise near the fortress walls, Ned could make out a pavilion grander than the rest, crowned by the golden stag. That, he thought, must be Renly's seat of command, or perhaps the site of his merrymaking. He approached cautiously, his men close behind, wary of any overzealous guard who might see a threat in these battered northerners. Soon enough, they were hailed by guards in Tyrell livery who demanded their names and intentions. When Ned declared himself, the guards blinked in surprise, then bowed stiffly. They escorted him through the lines of tents, murmuring excitedly that the famous Lord of Winterfell had come at last. Banners parted, revealing knights with plumes in their helmets, ladies in bright gowns, and minstrels strumming lively tunes. Ned had never been fond of pomp, and seeing it now, on the cusp of a civil war, only deepened his sense of disquiet. Renly, he thought, you have always liked the spectacle, but have you considered the price? They reached a large green pavilion, its entrance flanked by rose-cloaked guards. A young man in a fancy doublet announced, Lord Eddard Stark, to see his grace. The final words came out with a flourish that made Ned grimace, but he held his tongue as they were ushered inside. The interior glowed with lamplight and the air was perfumed with sweet incense. Renly Baratheon stood at the center, tall and broad-shouldered, a circlet of gold upon his thick black hair. He wore fine silks dyed in Baratheon gold with the stag sigil embroidered over his heart. Around him milled a half-dozen lords and ladies, among them Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, and various others from the Reach. Conversation died away the moment Ned appeared, replaced by a hush of curiosity. Renly's mouth curved into a bright smile as he strode forward. Lord Stark, I had not expected to see you so soon. Welcome to my camp. He clasped Ned's hand, exuding warmth. Ned inclined his head, more formal than friendly. Your Grace, Ned acknowledged softly, careful to choose his words. Renly's dark eyes flickered with approval at the respectful address, though Ned's vow of fealty was hardly certain. In the game of kings, every courtesy was scrutinized. Renly invited Ned deeper into the pavilion, dismissing the courtiers with a polite wave. Only Loras remained by Renly's side, a silent sentinel. Ned glanced at the knight, recalling the skill and valor the young Tyrell possessed. Then he turned his attention to Renly. I come to speak of a matter most urgent, Your Grace. War looms between you and Stannis. The realm cannot bear another conflict so soon after Robert's passing. Renly's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of frustration. My brother refuses to acknowledge that I am better suited to rule. The realm needs a king who can inspire loyalty, not just demand it. The Tyrells have pledged themselves to me. The Stormlords follow me gladly. Is it not clear that the small folk prefer a king who will bring prosperity and warmth rather than cold duty? Ned pressed his lips together, forming his reply carefully. I know you have many friends and perhaps you would be a fine king, but the law and custom of Westeros stand with Stannis as Robert's heir. If the two of you clash, the only victor will be the Lannisters. That is precisely why I must move swiftly, Renly retorted. If I gather enough strength, I can take King's Landing by storm, remove Joffrey, and claim the throne for myself before my brother can muster. The Lannisters will have no chance. The realm will be spared a lengthy war. Ned bristled. And what of Stannis, who also claims the throne by right? Do you plan to fight him if he refuses to bow? Renly's face hardened. He should kneel. If I can rally the lords, the people, even the faith, then he will have no choice. We are a younger realm than in centuries past. The times call for a king who can unify, not alienate. They went back and forth, voices measured yet tense. Ned pleaded that Renly at least consider a meeting with Stannis. Ned told him that his brother had granted 2 weeks before he marched. If Renly would attend a parley somewhere neutral, there might be a chance to reach an accord. Think of Robert, Ned urged softly. He loved you both. And think of the kingdom. You speak of unity, yet if you fight Stannis, thousands of men will die. Renly swallowed, glancing at Loras. The Knight of Flowers kept silent, but his gaze was intense, protective. Finally, Renly looked back to Ned. Very well. I will not refuse your attempt at mediation, but do not presume that I will surrender my rightful claim. Stannis would make a bitter king, unloved and unloving. The realm deserves better. Ned inclined his head. Then let us meet. If we can find compromise, the realm will be stronger for it. If not, he did not finish that sentence. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air. War, bloodshed, chaos. Renly nodded. Choose a neutral site near Storm's End, perhaps an open field where neither side can set an ambush. Yuha. V my word that I will arrive with only a small escort, provided Stannis does the same. They agreed that Ned would depart immediately to deliver Renly's acceptance. Then, in 3 days' time, each brother would arrive on the outskirts of Storm's End. The tension lay so thick in the pavilion that Ned could almost taste it. Renly politely arranged food and lodging for Ned's men, but Ned did not linger. He understood that the Tyrell camp's revelry was no place for a sober negotiation. After taking a brief rest, Ned and his loyal companions rode out again. Their route took them back toward Storm's End, but Ned could not shake a sense of relief that both Baratheon brothers had at least consented to talk. That was more than he might have hoped for. Still, he knew each man considered himself the rightful king. The question was whether either would bend enough to avoid war. He reached Storm's End on the second evening, the gray fortress looming in the dusk. Once again, guards checked him at the gates, but Stannis had left orders to admit Lord Stark at once. Ned made his way to the same Spartan chamber where Stannis studied his maps. The cold wind whipped through cracks in the ancient stone, rattling torches in their sconces. Stannis greeted him curtly, folding his arms over his chest. You return quickly. What news? He demanded. Renly agrees to meet 3 days from now outside Storm's End's walls. Both sides will come with a small escort only, Ned answered. He kept his tone steady, watching Stannis' reaction. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, lit Stannis' eyes. But he nodded. So be it. I will grant him that courtesy, though I do not expect a swift resolution. You have done your part, Ned Stark. I pray the gods reward your efforts. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation and worry. Ned remained at Storm's End, occasionally sending out scouts to verify that Renly's forces approached. Indeed, by the dawn of the designated day, word arrived that Renly had set up a modest encampment a league from the fortress. Stannis barked orders to his men to show no aggression. Ned watched from the battlements as a small company emerged from the northern horizon. Renly's banners fluttered in the freshening wind. Meanwhile, Stannis summoned a half-dozen of his most trusted retainers, among them the Dourser Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight who was rumored to hold Stannis' confidence. Ned also noticed a red-robed woman among Stannis' retinue with fiery hair and eyes that burned with unsettling conviction. He had heard rumors of a foreign priestess who had Stannis' ear but had never seen her in person. Now, her presence made the air feel charged with hidden energies. Renly arrived with an equally small company, Ser Loras by his side, along with a few Tyrell bannermen. The two groups met on an open field studded with rocky ground well within sight of Storm's End's looming walls. The ocean's roar echoed faintly and gulls circled overhead. Ned rode forward, wearing plain leathers, and positioned himself between the brothers. Stannis was perched upon a dark war horse, glowering beneath a black helm adorned with a stag's head sigil. Renly rode a lighter horse clad in polished armor and antlered helm under his arm. From a distance, it might have been a splendid meeting, two powerful lords astride their mounts, a crisp wind rippling the banners. But up close, Ned could feel the tension coil like a serpent in the grass. He raised a hand. My lords, we are gathered for peace. Please dismount so we might speak face to face without the weight of steel between us. Stannis and Renly exchanged hard stares, then, as if by unspoken agreement, they swung off their horses. Their small escorts followed suit. There on the grassy plain, Ned took a breath. Thank you. I propose that we speak openly for the good of the realm. He gestured to Stannis. My lord, you are Robert's older brother. By lineage, the Iron Throne might be yours if Joffrey is proven illegitimate. Then he turned to Renly, and you, my lord, have garnered support from many great houses, and you claim that your rule would bring unity and prosperity. Renly shot a sharp glance at his brother. I have the men. I have the support. The people love me as they never loved you, brother. They always whispered you were too stern, too humorless. Look around, where's your host? Dragonstone's men alone are not enough to unseat the Lannisters. Stannis stiffened, his face grim. I have loyal bannermen, Renly, more than you think. Men of the Narrow Sea, storm lords who owe me fealty. And I have justice on my side. That is worth more than your fleeting popularity. You speak of justice, Renly countered, but the realm needs more than cold righteousness. It needs hope. I can provide that. At this, the red-robed woman behind Stannis stepped forward. Melisandre, Ned assumed. She spoke in a voice low and resonant. The Lord of Light has chosen Stannis Baratheon as the one true king. I see it in the flames. All else is heresy. Renly scoffed, and some of his men laughed outright. Stannis glared. Davos Seaworth stood uncomfortably as though wishing he were elsewhere. Ned raised his hands again, voice firm. My lords, we will gain nothing by trading insults. I beg you to consider the alternative. If you unite with both of you recognized under a single banner. And which of us do you propose wear the crown, Lord Stark? Stannis interrupted. Shall I kneel to him, or he to me? Ned hesitated. He had known this moment would come. The laws of succession are clear, the eldest brother inherits. However, the realm needs the support that Renly has cultivated. Perhaps a compromise can be reached where Stannis sits the throne and Renly is named heir until such time. Ridiculous, Renly interjected, eyes flashing. That arrangement offers me nothing unless I wait for Stannis to die. He turned to his brother. I have the swords, brother. Men follow me gladly. Why should I yield? You will watch your soldiers desert you one by one until you have no choice but to kneel. Stannis' lips pressed tight. You confuse loyalty with feasting and music. The men who flock to you now will scatter at the first sign of real hardship. Do you remember how Storm's End held out during Robert's rebellion? I starved with our men, but I did not yield. That is true loyalty, not the superficial adoration you purchase with parties. Renly's face colored with anger. He stepped forward, fists clenched. Ned sensed the argument was sliding toward confrontation, so he interposed himself, voice stern. My lords, the realm stands on the brink of disaster. The Lannisters hold King's Landing with an illegitimate king. You cannot both claim the throne. War between you is exactly what the Lannisters desire because it weakens House Baratheon. Is there no arrangement to share rule in some capacity? Co-regents until the matter is settled by a great council? Or even some formal recognition that one is king and the other is recognized with substantial powers and titles? Renly spat on the ground, shaking his head. I will not be a mere subordinate in a realm I can save. It is not the throne I crave for ambition's sake alone, but the well-being of the people. Stannis has never understood the common folk. He will rule by fear. I offer them hope. Stannis's expression darkened. Your claim to care for the common folk is a pretense. You want the glory of wearing a crown. Do not pretend otherwise. He drew a breath, glancing at Ned. I am sorry, Lord Stark. I appreciate your efforts, but my brother is deaf to reason. Renly bristled. Reason is not what you call it. This is pure stubborn pride. You believe a birth order is enough to command the throne? If the realm does not want you, no law can force them. They will rise up or desert you. Their voices rose with each accusation, and men on both sides bristled, hands drifting to the pommels of swords. Ned felt the weight of the moment, fear coiling in his gut. Stop this, he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that hushed them momentarily. In the name of the memory of Robert Baratheon, stop. We have come here to avoid violence, not to threaten it. If you two cannot find an agreement now, think of the thousands of innocent lives that will be lost should you turn steel against each other. A strained silence followed. Renly stared at his brother, chest heaving. Stannis' face was stone, but behind that rigid mask Ned sensed deep fury. Melisandre's eyes flickered with a strange light, and Ned felt a sudden chill as though darkness threatened to envelop the field. Then Renly exhaled, turning away. Ned, I will not give up my claim. If Stannis steps aside, I would be generous. He can hold Dragonstone, Storms, and any seat he likes. But he must name me King of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Stannis' voice came out like iron scraping stone. I will never bend the knee to you, Renly. I am the rightful heir. You are my younger brother. Stand with me, and together we will crush the Lannisters, or stand apart and I will crush you as well. The choice is yours. Renly turned slowly. Then we have nothing more to say. With that, he strode back toward his horse. Stannis stood rooted, fists clenched. Ned swore quietly under his breath, his heart sinking. All his efforts seemed to have fallen on deaf ears. He quickly stepped after Renly, voice low, urgent. Wait, there must be another way. Think of the consequences. Renly swung into his saddle, armor glinting. The consequence is that I will not bow to a man who lacks the warmth and spirit to rule. This war, if it comes, will be quick. I plan to march on King's Landing, dethrone Joffrey, and claim the Iron Throne as the realm's savior. Once I am seated there, Stannis will be forced to relent. Ned's blood chilled. You're leaving the matter of your brother unresolved. If you march on King's Landing, do you truly expect Stannis to stand idle? He will declare war on you. Two fronts, Renly. That's how the realm ends up in chaos. Renly's face hardened. I have no choice unless he yields. This is done. He kicked his horse, heading back to his line of men. They began to withdraw, leaving Ned standing in the middle of the field, Storm's End looming behind him. On the other side, Stannis watched, silent as a statue. At length, the older brother jerked his head at Davos and the rest, and they too retreated. Ned stood alone, the wind sighing through the tall grass, his mind churning with dread. The meeting had failed. The only glimmer of hope was that they had not drawn swords then and there. But from what Ned had seen, it was only a matter of time. The faint morning sun shone through the clouds, promising a bright day for the field, but not, he thought bleakly, for the realm. He trudged back to Storm's End, mind already racing with ideas. Could he somehow appeal to Stannis' sense of duty, or Renly's desire for adoration? If they would not meet on the field as equals, maybe a private entreaty would succeed. But as soon as Ned reached the fortress courtyard, he saw Stannis dismiss his men with a curt gesture and stride inside, face set in harsh lines. Ned followed, though the guards gave him suspicious glances. He found Stannis in the same war room, leaning over a table crowded with letters and maps. The Red Priestess hovered behind him. Stannis glared up as Ned entered. It was pointless, he said, voice flat. He will not bend. So be it. I will call my banners. Ned stepped closer, ignoring the presence of Melisandre. My lord, with respect, are you so willing to risk thousands of lives? I beg you at least delay your assault. Let me speak to Renly again once he reaches King's Landing. Maybe? Stannis cut him off. Renly does not care for negotiations. You saw his arrogance. If he were half the man Robert was, he would have recognized the law is on my side. I have no interest in waiting for him to seat himself on the Iron Throne. If he claims the capital before I can unmask Joffrey's parentage, the realm will rally behind him as the new usurper." His lips curled. "No, Lord Stark. This is war." Melisandre placed a pale hand on Stannis' shoulder. "The flames show the one true king triumphant. The false stags cannot stand before the fire of righteousness. Trust in the Lord of Light, my king, and all shall bow to your might." There was fervor in her voice, and something about it made Ned's heart hammer with disquiet. He spoke calmly nonetheless. "I have no knowledge of your gods, my lord, but I do know bloodshed tears families apart. Renly is your brother. Does that mean nothing to you?" Stannis clenched his jaw. He gave up any right to brotherhood when he crowned himself. "And so I must see this through." That was the final word. Ned recognized the unyielding stance, the unwavering determination that had once held Storm's End through the worst siege in living memory. Stannis would not relent. Wearily, Ned bowed his head. "Then I will take my leave, my lord." Stannis only grunted, returning to his maps. Outside, the day felt colder despite the climb of the sun. Ned convened with his men, discussing their next move. One asked if they would return to King's Landing. Another suggested heading north to rally the Northern Bannermen. But Ned refused both for the moment. He could not in good conscience allow these two great forces to tear each other apart without trying again. Possibly he could intercept Renly's march, speak reason to him, or at least convince him to wait. If Renly could be persuaded to slow his approach, perhaps Stannis' anger might cool. But the rift seemed impossibly wide. They rode from Storm's End in haste, setting out on the main road that led west, where Renly was rumored to have turned his forces toward King's Landing. The columns of Tyrell and Stormland's knights would not move quickly, especially with baggage trains. Ned followed the road day after day, scanning the horizon for signs of the host. Townsfolk along the way whispered that an army of thousands had passed through, bright banners streaming. Ned's progress was faster, but the advantage was small. On the fourth afternoon, he encountered the tail end of Renly's traveling camp near a broad river crossing. The day was warm, the sun shining on the glint of armor and spears. Smoke from many cookfires rose into the sky. Ned requested an audience. A group of men-at-arms recognized him and rushed off with messages. Soon, Ser Loras Tyrell himself arrived, splendid in green enameled plate. He greeted Ned courteously but with caution. "Lord Stark, you come again? Have you not heard that the negotiation failed?" "I have heard," Ned replied, voice grim. "Yet I must speak to your king once more. Is he here?" Loras nodded, leading Ned through the sprawl of tents. They passed wagons loaded with provisions, knights polishing their gear, camp followers cooking stews. The scale of Renly's force was staggering. Easily 10 or 15,000, if not more. This was no minor levy. It was a considerable army, and most men seemed in high spirits. Their laughter and songs made Ned uneasy. They had no real inkling of the horrors of war. Eventually, they reached a command tent near the water's edge, where Renly stood studying a map with several lords, including Randall Tarley and Mathis Rowan. Renly looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as Ned entered. "You return, Lord Stark? Have you come to join us at last?" Renly's tone was half teasing, half curious. Ned shook his head. "I come to appeal to your mercy, your sense of brotherhood. War with Stannis will cost more than either of you can afford." Renly let out a frustrated breath. "Ned, I respect you, but you do not seem to grasp the situation. I have an overwhelming force. I am marching to King's Landing to remove an illegitimate boy from the throne. If Stannis wishes to hamper me, that is on his head, not mine." Ned pressed. "But don't you see that by ignoring him, you provoke him into attacking you from behind? Then the Lannisters remain in power, or at least gain time to fortify. There must be another way." Renly's face hardened again. "I have tried to speak with him. He demands I kneel. I cannot. Now I will do what must be done. That is all." He turned away, returning his focus to the lords around him, clearly signaling that he believed the conversation ended. Ned refused to yield so easily. "At least wait a short while. Delay your march. Let me send ravens to all great lords, calling for a great council to decide the matter of succession. This council could also be used to prove Joffrey's illegitimacy. If you are truly confident in your popularity, you will be chosen to wear the crown. If you proceed by conquest, You only encourage more violence." Renly glanced at Ned, a hint of pity in his eyes. "That would take too long, and I do not trust the Lannisters or my brother to remain idle. Each day we wait is another day they can gather forces. I must strike now while the advantage is mine. I'm sorry, Ned." And that was that. The lords looked at Ned as if expecting him to leave. Loras shifted, his face sympathetic but firm. Ned's shoulders slumped in defeat. He could almost hear the drums of war beating in the distance. The Baratheon brothers, unstoppable forces of pride, would inevitably clash, and he, Eddard Stark, had failed to mend the rift. Weary to his bones, he asked for leave to stay in the camp that night, resting himself and his men. Renly consented, waving a hand. As Ned turned to depart, he heard the lords resume their conversation about supply lines and short routes to King's Landing. The machinery of war was in motion. That evening, Ned sat by a small campfire with his men, a simple stew warming in the pot. The night sky glittered with stars, mocking the darkness in his heart. He replayed every conversation with Stannis and Renly, searching for a missed detail or possible angle. Perhaps if he had chosen different words, or invoked Robert's memory more strongly, or threatened them both with northern neutrality. But the die was cast. The only consolation he had was that he had tried. He stared into the flames, recalling the promise he had made to Robert on his deathbed. Protect the realm? Then he remembered Arya and Sansa thousands of leagues behind them in King's Landing or heading north. He felt a pang of longing for the crisp air of Winterfell, for the simple joys of his family. That life seemed so far away, overshadowed by the weight of duty thrust upon him. On the morrow, Ned rose early, the first pale light creeping over the horizon. He decided there was one final attempt he could make, to appeal to the better angels of each brother by sending them letters. If face-to-face negotiation had failed, perhaps a carefully crafted letter might sink into their pride. It seemed futile, but he refused to surrender to hopelessness without exhausting every possibility. So he spent a quiet hour composing 2 letters, one addressed to Stannis, the other to Renly, each urging them to consider a compromise, to think of the realm, to recall their love for Robert, and to search their hearts for a path to peace. He gave the letters to 2 separate writers with instructions to deliver them and wait for a written reply. Then, with a heavy heart, Ned told his men to break camp. They would ride north, away from this doomed conflict. In truth, he had no illusions that these letters would succeed where direct negotiation had failed. But at least his conscience would be clear. A few of his men asked if they should pledge to either brother. Ned shook his head gravely. The North's loyalty was always to the king. Robert was. I cannot choose between these two who would be kin. G.S. Our part is done for now. Thus began their journey northward, passing through villages already half-emptied by men called to war. Fields lay fallow, livestock roamed untended, and families huddled in their homes, uncertain of what the future held. The specter of civil war hovered over the land, and Ned's heart ached at the thought of what was soon to come. He recalled the devastation of Robert's rebellion, how entire villages were razed, how families lost fathers and sons. And that war, at least, had a singular aim: to unseat the Mad King. This war seemed murkier, driven by 2 proud brothers with rival claims. If they only knew the greater threats looming, beyond the wall or among the cunning Lannisters, they might have joined forces. But men were mortal and pride was potent indeed. Word reached Ned in scattered form over the next week. Renly advanced along the Rose Road, gathering more Knights of the Reach to his banner. Stannis moved his fleet from Dragonstone, rumored to be sailing around the Stormlands to cut off certain supply lines, or perhaps to land near King's Landing as well. The tension in the realm soared. By the time Ned reached an inn along a trade route, he heard that skirmishes had already occurred between foraging parties, with men dead on both sides. The news only darkened his mood. War had begun in earnest. The rift he had tried to mend was now a chasm. Yet, in that same inn, Ned received an unexpected message. A rider in black livery bearing the seal of Storm's End approached him quietly while Ned ate a meager supper in a corner table. "My lord, I was told to find you," the man said. He offered a small parchment sealed with wax. Ned recognized Stannis' sigil. Surprised, he broke the seal and read. The letter was brief, lacking in pleasantries. But it carried a significant request. "Lord Stark, the time for parley has passed. But I recall your counsel. If you yet stand ready to see justice done, come to me at your earliest convenience. There are truths I must share, truths that may shape the fate of the realm." Ned's brow furrowed. What new truth could Stannis possibly reveal? Had the letter been written out of desperation, or was there some genuine bombshell that might change the course of events? It ended with a single line, "I speak not of minor rumors, but of matters that may shake the 7 kingdoms to its very foundation." The last word was scrawled as though Stannis' hand had hesitated. Ned felt a stir of unease. Could it be about Joffrey's parentage? But that was already known to them. Or did it concern something more ominous, like the foreign religion of the Red Priestess? Ned glanced at his men. They were weary, longing for the north. But duty called again. If there was the slightest chance that Stannis' revelations might prevent the realm from descending further into chaos, Ned had to investigate. He turned to his men and explained they would make another journey south, albeit carefully. Some grumbled, but none refused him. They rode at dawn, skirting the main roads to avoid the massing armies. Within a fortnight, they neared the Stormlands once more, finding subtle pathways that kept them out of sight. Stannis' letter instructed Ned to meet him not at Storm's End, but at a lesser castle on the southern coast, half in ruins from an ancient conflict. Ned prayed it was not an elaborate trap, yet something in his gut told him that Stannis was too proud to lure him dishonorably. The man might be rigid, but not treacherous. At least Ned hoped so. They approached the dilapidated fortress by night. Its walls jutted unevenly with broken parapets leaning precariously toward the sea. A few torches flickered along the gate. The sound of crashing waves filled the air. Ned's men looked tense, but they followed him inside. The courtyard was bleak, littered with rubble. A handful of Stannis' guards waited, stoic. They led Ned to a cramped hall where Stannis stood by a single brazier that provided warmth. Melisandre was there, too, her red robes a striking contrast to the gloom. Davos lingered in the background, his face etched with worry. The moment Ned stepped in, Stannis dismissed the guards, leaving only a handful of trusted faces in the shadows. "Lord Stark," Stannis said, voice weighed down by something like resignation. "I thank you for coming." Ned inclined his head, scanning the chamber. He noted parchments spread out on a table, a strange black dagger, a few old volumes with cracked spines. "I received your letter. You spoke of grave truths. I have risked much to hear them. Pray tell me what is so urgent." Stannis hesitated, glancing at Melisandre. The priestess nodded, her eyes glowing with an eerie fire. Then Stannis gestured to a piece of parchment. "I have come upon certain prophecies, shall we say. Hints from the flames that Melisandre has read, but also from accounts hidden away in texts. They speak of a great darkness beyond the realm we know, an ancient threat that stirs. I know how it sounds, I did not believe it myself. But Melisandre has shown me visions. I have seen shapes in the fire." Ned felt a chill prickle the back of his neck. He thought of old stories about the Long Night, White Walkers, and the secrets that even maesters barely recalled. "Go on," he said quietly, though he already guessed where this might lead. Stannis lifted his gaze. "They speak of winter's terror, of an enemy that cannot be defeated by ordinary steel. The legends call them the Others. I once dismissed these as children's tales, but I have seen signs. The dead rising, whispers from the north, and the flames confirm an evil stirs waiting to consume the living in endless night." Ned's heart thudded. Memories of his youth, hearing old Nan's tales by the hearth, flickered through his mind. He had always thought them stories for children, but recent tidings from the wall, wildlings on the move, the uneasy sense that the winds were shifting, haunted him. "How did you learn all this?" he whispered. Stannis exhaled. "At Dragonstone, my men found old scrolls that once belonged to Maester Crescent. They referenced prophecies of Azor Ahai Reborn, the prince that was promised. I began to question Melisandre's pronouncements to see if they had basis in older lore. We discovered scattered accounts, half-burned, referencing a darkness in the far north. Melisandre's visions in the flames speak of armies of the dead, of an endless winter." Ned turned to Melisandre. She regarded him calmly, the firelight dancing in her red hair. "The Lord of Light reveals truth to those who listen," she said softly. "He shows us that only his champion can stand against the darkness. Stannis Baratheon, the chosen king, must unite the realm to face this threat. All lesser claims pale before this." A hush settled, broken only by the crackle of the brazier. Ned tried to collect his thoughts, though they whirled in confusion and fear. "This, if it is true, why tell me? What can be done?" Stannis' gaze burned. "You asked us to reconcile, to unite. I refused because of my brother's obstinacy. But I begin to see that if this threat is real, we cannot afford petty wars. We must gather every sword, every resource. But Renly spurns me. Perhaps with this knowledge, you might persuade him? Or else persuade other great lords to rally behind the true threat, not these petty squabbles." Ned ran a hand through his hair. "But proof? Words of prophecy alone will not move many lords. They will call it madness or some foreign devilry." He paused, swallowing. "Yet I cannot ignore this. The wall is manned by the Night's Watch, but they are few and hardly prepared for such a threat. If the others are truly stirring, we need the entire realm. Which means we need peace between you and Renly. Stannis's mouth twisted in frustration. I see no easy path. Renly is marching on King's Landing. The Lannisters remain entrenched. My position is precarious. Yet I cannot ignore the truth any more than you can. The cold winds are rising. Ned breathed deeply, his mind racing. If the threat from beyond the wall was real, the War of the Five Kings was a catastrophic distraction. Somehow they must unify. But how? Renly would not kneel. Stannis would not yield. Could the truth of an otherworldly threat be enough to break their pride? Perhaps. Or perhaps not until the cold winds were upon them. But Ned could not leave it to chance. I will go to Renly again, he said, voice trembling with urgency. I will try to persuade him that this is bigger than any crown. But you must do your part, Stannis. Halt your offensive. Give me time. Melisandre nodded as if she had foreseen this. Stannis stared at the ground. I want that crown, Ned, but not at the cost of dooming the realm. I will stay my hand at least for a while. But if Renly persists, if the Lannisters close in, I cannot remain idle forever. Ned placed a hand on the table, feeling the roughness of the wood. Thank you. That is all I ask. I go now. May the gods old and new guide us. He turned to leave, but paused, looking back at the Red Priestess. My lady, these visions, are you certain they speak the truth? Her red lips curved slightly. The flames do not lie, but men must choose how to interpret what they see. Go, Lord Stark. Fulfill your part in the story. Ned departed that night, a renewed sense of purpose filling him despite the dread. He led his men north once more, seeking any chance to intercept Renly's host or at least find him at King's Landing. The city itself was a nest of Lannisters, but if Renly intended a siege, Ned might approach from a flank. The journey was grueling, full of the ever-present tension of traveling in war-torn lands. Stories of raids and skirmishes abounded, peasants fleeing, roads unsafe. Still, they pressed on. Within a fortnight, they began to see evidence of Renly's approach. Lannister outriders occasionally appeared on the horizon, only to vanish. Smoke rose from the direction of the Rose Road, perhaps from burned farms or fields. Rumor said that Renly's vanguard was only a few days from King's Landing. Ned spurred his horse onward, praying he could find Renly before the battle lines formed. Each mile hammered home the reality: civil war was about to become a brutal siege. By the time they reached the rolling hills south of the Blackwater Rush, Ned spotted a vast encampment. Renly had set up a siege perimeter? Possibly. Smoke curled into the sky, and the glint of thousands of spears shimmered in the distance. As Ned's men approached, a patrol challenged them. The men recognized Ned's name, though, and allowed him to pass on to the main camp, where lords scurried in and out of large pavilions. Banners snapped in the wind, golden roses, crowned stags, and the sigils of countless lesser houses. The outskirts of King's Landing were visible a few leagues away, its walls rising beyond the muddy waters of the Blackwater. Ned asked for Renly at once and was directed to a large pavilion near the forward lines. The mood in the camp seemed different from before, more tense, less festive. The lords wore grim expressions, the men spoke in hushed tones. The reality of facing the Lannisters' formidable defenses had set in, it seemed. Ned made his way inside, finding Renly surrounded by advisors poring over a map of the city's walls. He glanced up, startled. Lord Stark? I had thought you'd return to the north. Ned didn't mince words. We must speak in private, Your Grace. It concerns a matter that eclipses this war. Renly frowned but waved his lords away, beckoning Ned to follow him to a quieter corner. What is so urgent? Ned took a breath, choosing his words carefully. I have news from your brother, but it is not about your rivalry. It is about a threat in the far north, something that could upend everything we know. Stannis has shared with me knowledge of an ancient darkness that stirs beyond the wall, the others, the White Walkers. I know you may scoff, as I once did, but I beg you to hear me out. If this threat is real, every moment we spend fighting each other only leaves us more vulnerable. Renly's expression flickered between confusion and suspicion. The others? Tales for children, Ned. I know Stannis is desperate, but that is a poor ploy to scare me into halting my advance. It is no ploy, Ned insisted. Stannis believes it, and from what I've seen, I do as well. He has discovered old texts, collaborated with that Red Priestess. There are omens. The Night's Watch has reported strange sightings. The wildlings mass in the thousands. Something stirs, Renly. If we do not prepare, if we do not unite, our petty war will pale in comparison to the horrors that may come. Renly pressed his lips together. You expect me to call off the siege, abandon my claim to the throne, on the word of Stannis and some foreign woman? He shook his head. What if this is a trick, a means to buy time for him to gather more support? The Lannisters would remain in power, and then we'd face a united front from Stannis and the Lannisters. No, Ned. I'm not a fool. Frustration welled in Ned. I understand your caution, but at least consider it. Stannis has offered to halt his offensive if you will do the same. Call a truce. Perhaps you both come to the capital under a banner of peace, dethrone Joffrey with minimal bloodshed, and then gather the realm's resources to defend against what lies beyond the wall. Renly folded his arms. So Stannis still insists on dethroning Joffrey as well? That might tempt me, but only if I remain king after. Will he kneel? Ned suppressed the urge to groan. That was not discussed in detail, but if the threat is as dire as Stannis believes, the question of who wears the crown becomes secondary. We must rally every sword, including the Lannisters if we can. The entire realm must come together. At the mention of uniting with the Lannisters, Renly's face twisted in disgust. You speak madness, Ned Stark. Even if I believed your tales of ice demons, I would never join forces with Cersei and her brood. He paused, collecting himself. I will not let fear of myths dictate my claim. This city will fall to me. Once Joffrey is dethroned, once the Tyrells and Storm Lords have placed me on the Iron Throne, then I will consider the matter of the North's fables. That is the best I can offer. Ned felt the cold weight of despair settle again. By then, it may be too late. If the others sweep down. So you say? Renly cut him off, but I have not seen any others. I see only Lannisters perched on the throne, bleeding the realm. That is the threat I can see and fight. If your stories prove true, I will face that threat when it reveals itself. He sighed, looking almost regretful. I'm sorry, Ned. You have my respect, but not my faith in this matter. Ned bowed his head, feeling the final blow to all his hopes. He knew then that Renly's ambition, even if well-intentioned, was too strong. Nothing short of seeing the undead with his own eyes might sway him. Rising from the pavilion, Ned softly replied, Very well, my king. I have done all I can. Ned left the camp that very night, the fires of the siege twinkling behind him like a false dawn. He could almost sense the approach of chaos, armies clashing, a city under threat, while a far greater danger loomed in the north. His breath caught in his throat as he realized that all his attempts had failed. He had tried to broker peace between the Baratheon brothers, but pride and old grudges ran too deep. Even the knowledge of a doom beyond understanding did not deter their quest for the Iron Throne. That long ride away from King's Landing was the bleakest journey of Ned's life. He and his men chose smaller roads again, though the presence of Lannister, Tyrell, and other forces made every step perilous. Occasionally, scouts or patrols threatened them, but Ned's name and reputation shielded them from arrest, at least for the moment. He could not remain near the city, though. If Renly attacked and overcame the Lannisters, or if Stannis arrived and clashed with them both, Ned would be a target for every side. And yet, none of that weighed as heavily as the knowledge that the realm was sundered with no sign of reconciliation. At last, after weeks of travel through war-torn lands, Ned reached Harrenhal, its melted towers looming like blackened fingers clawing at the sky. It was a place of ill omen, but also a meeting ground for various lords uncertain of which side to join. Inside those haunted halls, Ned lingered, resting his weary men. He sent ravens north, urging the Night's Watch to remain vigilant. He also wrote letters to any great lord who might still heed him, asking them to prepare for the possibility of a threat from beyond the wall. Most would likely dismiss it as lunacy, but Ned could not remain silent. Even if the realm fell into civil war, some must keep watch for the true danger. Days turned to weeks, and the storms of battle raged far away. Word came that Renly laid siege to King's Landing. The city's defenses were stout, and the Lannisters fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Stannis' fleet had been spotted off the coast, possibly preparing for an assault on the capital from the Blackwater Bay side. The War of the Five Kings, rumors now named it, for Robb Stark and Balon Greyjoy had also declared themselves kings in their own realms. Ned read these tidings in grim silence, heart heavy. He was powerless to unite the realm now. It seemed all he could do was wait. But one dawn, a raven arrived at Harrenhal bearing a message sealed with gold wax, the Stag of Baratheon. Inside, the letter was short, signed by Stannis himself. Lord Stark, I write to inform you that the city is in turmoil. Renly's forces camp without, my fleet nears the bay. The Lannisters have grown desperate. If you still believe in the greater cause, come to us. My men will not harm you. War is upon us, but I have not forgotten the threat you and I discussed. I stand ready to do what must be done once the city is ours. Ned read it twice, feeling the weight of every word. War was upon them, yes, but perhaps, just perhaps, if Stannis and Renly shattered the Lannisters, a path might open for a more unified Westeros, one that could then face the looming darkness. Ned felt no joy in the prospect of more bloodshed, but the realm had spun beyond his control. All he could do was stand by his convictions. He packed his few belongings, rallied his men, and set out once more, heading for the capital where the final confrontation brewed. As Ned rode, he could almost hear Robert's ghost beside him, laughing ruefully at the madness unleashed. Ned whispered a vow into the wind, "I did all I could, old friend. Let the gods have mercy on us now." And in the back of his mind, the memory of Melisandre's warning flickered of a cold night and an enemy that did not rest. If Westeros could not unite, the darkest hours were yet to come. Honor alone might not be enough to save them. But Ned Stark would continue to try until the last breath left his body. He pressed forward, spurring his horse into a gallop, determined to find whatever small hope might remain in a realm broken by ambition, pride, and fear. Though the distance stretched far and war beckoned on all sides, Ned rode on, guided by the spark of duty and the faintest belief that if men of honor did not relent, perhaps the realm could still be saved from itself, and from the far greater threat slumbering beyond the wall. Ned Stark pressed his horse onward through the war-ravaged heart of the Riverlands, his breath pluming in the chill air. A thin, late-spring sun cast pale light upon the rolling hills and patchy farmland, revealing the scars of conflict. Scorched farmsteads, broken fences, and fields trampled by mounted foragers. The men who rode with Ned, mostly Northmen sworn to Winterfell, loyal and unflinching, kept silent watch. Their faces were grim beneath travel-stained cloaks. They had followed him through every twist and turn, from King's Landing to Storm's End and back again, and now once more toward the capital. Each footfall and jolt in the saddle reminded Ned that time was slipping away. The city was ringed by strife. Stannis and Renly both closed in, each believing himself the rightful king of Westeros, each seemingly deaf to Ned's pleas for unity. Ned could still feel the foreboding weight of Stannis' letter tucked carefully in his saddlebag. "War is upon us," Stannis had written, "but I have not forgotten the threat we discussed. Return to me and we will do what must be done." The threat meant the others, the white shadows beyond the wall, the waking darkness that neither Renly nor the Lannisters cared to heed. And yet what truly weighed on Ned's mind was how to keep the kingdom from imploding before that greater enemy could even descend. If the living weakened themselves in civil war, how would they ever stand against an ancient evil? He had tried so earnestly to mediate the hostility between Renly and Stannis, but he had failed. Each brother believed in his own cause as though the gods themselves had spoken. It made no matter that both men claimed House Baratheon's banner. Their pride was as strong as the fortress walls each commanded. And so Ned found himself once more riding headlong into the tumult, guided by duty rather than hope. When at last they crested a gentle ridge, the land opened before them. The Blackwater rush wound in silvery ribbons through the low fields, glinting in the faint afternoon sun. The walls of King's Landing could be seen in the distance, a dark outline against the horizon. What unsettled Ned most was the sight of two large camps on opposite sides of the city. At a guess, one had to be Renly's, supported by Tyrell banners, while the other had the darker presence of Stannis' forces and fleet, though it was hard to see from so far away. Somewhere beyond, the Lannisters still held the city itself, behind its high walls and iron gates. Smoke rose from within as though from 1,000 hearths or 1,000 anxious fires preparing for siege. Ned's men shifted uneasily. One of them, a tall retainer named Mathar, gazed out at the scattering of tents. "Looks like we'll have more than a little trouble reaching whichever camp we choose, my lord," he said softly. Ned nodded, understanding the man's concern. They were only 24 riders, not an army. They must approach with caution or they risked being taken by either side as spies. "We'll skirt north," he told them, "and approach Stannis' lines. I have his protection, at least in name. We'll go carefully until we find a herald or outrider who can vouch for our safe passage." They proceeded, riding at a measured pace. Signs of the siege sprang up as they neared. Barricades of sharpened stakes dotted the ridges. Watchtowers erected in haste and manned by vigilant soldiers. Smoke from camp kitchens and forges mingled in the crisp wind. The clang of hammer on steel echoed faintly. Ned's party rode under a simple banner, the dire wolf of Stark, plain and unadorned by any additional flourish. That standard still commanded respect, or at least recognition. Though the realm was fracturing, House Stark had not yet declared for any side. Ned had come only to quell bloodshed, not to add to it. Soon enough, a mounted patrol approached, halberds and spears at the ready. They wore black and gold tabards, reminiscent of Stannis' colors, though darker than the bright gold Renly preferred. The men eyed Ned's company warily as they closed in. Ned pulled up his horse and raised a hand in greeting. "I am Eddard Stark," he said, his voice carrying over the whistling breeze. "Lord of Winterfell, come in peace to speak with Lord Stannis." The patrol captain squinted, as though measuring the truth of Ned's words. He was a lean man, weathered by wind and war, with a pock-scarred face. "We've orders to allow Lord Stark safe passage, though we didn't expect you from the northwest. Follow me. Best keep your hands away from your steel until we reach the main lines." Ned complied. "We've no intention of drawing swords here." The men parted, leading Ned's group along a muddy track that wound behind the lines of Stannis' siege encampment. They passed rows of tents, lines of tethered horses, piles of provisions, evidence that Stannis was not content to remain idle. Catapults and siege engines stood in partial assembly. Farther ahead, Ned glimpsed a wooden scaffolding from which a large scorpion or ballista might hurl bolts at the city walls. Though Stannis boasted fewer men than Renly, these forces were disciplined, purposeful. Ned could read it in their faces. They believed in their grim commander's cause, or, at the very least, they feared his iron will. Eventually, they came to a command tent of heavy canvas, black with gold fastenings. Outside stood guards in the same austere black and gold, gazes alert. One man stepped forward and raised a hand for them to halt. "His Grace is within. Lord Stark, you may enter," he announced. "Your men will wait here." Ned slid from the saddle, nodding at his companions. "Wait here," he murmured. "I should not be long." Some looked uneasy, but none protested. If Stannis wanted Ned dead, a handful of additional swords would make no difference. For all his sternness, Stannis Baratheon was no treacherous cutthroat. That, at least, Ned believed with all his heart. He pushed aside the tent flap and stepped in. The smell of hot wax and coarse wool struck him first. Inside, a brazier glowed, offering scant warmth. Stannis Baratheon stood over a makeshift table, studying a large map pinned down by daggers at the corners. Ser Davos Seaworth was there as well, quiet as ever, his head turning when Ned entered. Melisandre stood to one side, the red light of the brazier dancing in her fiery hair, her posture poised as though she were a statue in devotion. A few other advisors hovered in the dim corners, men Ned recognized from Storm's End, lords or lesser knights who had cast their lot with the elder Baratheon. Stannis looked up with a curt nod. He wore dark ringmail beneath a surcoat bearing the flaming heart and crowned stag. That surcoat was new to Ned's eyes, an open acknowledgement of the Red Priestess's religion somehow entwined with the Baratheon sigil. "Lord Stark," Stannis said gruffly, as though greeting a man who had arrived hours later than promised. "I am glad you came. We are at the brink." Ned approached, bowing his head a fraction. "I've ridden day and night from Harrenhal, my lord. Has the battle begun?" Stannis's mouth tightened. "Not yet. Renly's host is on the south side of the city, entrenching. The Lannisters hold the walls with that boy king they still call Joffrey, and my ships are positioned at the mouth of Blackwater Bay. We circle like wolves around a wounded boar." He pointed to a mark on the map. "I had half a mind to strike first, but Renly's presence complicates matters. If I attack King's Landing alone, I fear Renly might use the moment to strike at my flank." Ned's gaze traced the lines on the map, each symbol representing fortifications or possible assault routes. "It's the same dilemma that faces Renly," Ned said softly. "Neither side can turn their full attention to the Lannisters for fear the other brother will stab them in the back." Stannis gave a short, sharp nod. "Exactly so. Yet the Lannisters are cunning. Tywin is rumored to be gathering forces to the west, preparing to come to the city's aid. The longer we wait, the stronger they become." Ned recognized the shape of that conundrum. "If only you and Renly could unite." He saw the flicker of anger in Stannis' eyes. "We have gone in circles on that point, Ned Stark. My brother remains unyielding. I have spoken with him, offered him Storm's End and other concessions, but he demands the crown for himself. He claims the realm loves him. He refuses to kneel." From the corner, Melisandre's voice rose. "He would set a false king on a throne destined for the Lord's chosen." Her accent shaped the words with quiet finality. "Yet the night is dark and full of terrors. We have no time for brotherly squabbles." Ned pressed his lips together, recalling how those same words had done little to move Renly in the Tyrell camp. Renly saw the Red Woman as a foreign sorceress, a manipulator. "My lord," Ned began carefully, "the others you spoke of, do you still hold to that threat?" Stannis's gaze shifted, and for a moment Ned saw how tired he was, how heavily the burdens of this war weighed upon him. More than ever, he replied. Melisandre's flames show them stirring in the far north, amid blizzards and dark shapes. If we do not unite the kingdom soon, if we do not forge alliances, we will be devoured. I'd have marched north already were it not for the Lannisters and my own brother making a mockery of my claim. Ned exhaled, his breath steaming in the cold tent air. Then let us try again to speak with Renly. I spoke to him once since your last parley, but he was resolved to lay siege to the city and claim the throne. Perhaps if you reached out again now. Stannis was already shaking his head, frustration etched into the lines of his face. I have tried. He will not answer my ravens, and his outriders chase away my envoys. If you wish to speak with him, do so. But I doubt he will yield unless forced. Ned looked to Davos, who stood near the brazier. The Onion Knight offered a small, grim shrug as if to say the situation was hopeless. Still, Ned refused to let the matter die. If we force a confrontation, Ned said, the realm's armies will be shattered, if not by you, then by Renly or the Lannisters. Even if you prevail, your forces will be so depleted that the threat from the far north might prove unstoppable. Surely Renly sees that, at least in part. Stannis let out a weary sigh. He sees only a crown that should never have been his to claim. My brother has always been too enamored of bright pageantry. Let him have his feasts, I will have the throne by law. Then and only then can we muster the realm against the dark. All the rest is noise. Ned recognized that stony resolve. Stannis was a man who clung to duty and law before all else. Then you have no intention of drawing back? Stannis paused, glancing at Melisandre as though seeking validation. Her gaze was unwavering, the rubies at her throat shimmering in the dim light. I cannot withdraw. Not now. I will see this to its end. But I will also keep my focus on the larger war to come. If the gods are good, we will break the Lannisters quickly, then we can turn our attention to the north. He rubbed a hand across his brow. Speak to Renly if you must, but I doubt he will accept any compromise. Ned felt the depth of the gulf between them and realized that Stannis's more pressing worry was not the others at all. He might pay lip service to that threat, he might even believe it, but he would not yield the battlefield to Renly. Uniting the realm seemed an impossible dream. Still, Ned refused to give in. Very well. I will speak with Renly, he said. I have known your brother since he was a boy at court. Perhaps something can be done. Stannis's only response was a short, curt nod that might have carried a flicker of gratitude. Then he flicked his gaze to Davos. Arrange a guide to take Lord Stark around our lines. I'll not have him tripping into the Lannisters' outposts or stepping into one of Renly's archery ranges. We must keep him safe if there's any hope he can reason with that fool brother of mine. Davos bowed. At once, your grace. The meeting ended as abruptly as it had begun. Ned took his leave, slipping back outside into the camp. The sky above was gray and dull, the sun dipping behind tall clouds. His men waited anxiously by their horses. Ned spared them a few words of reassurance. We'll ride soon to Renly's camp. There's no peace to be found here, but perhaps we can still keep them from bloodshed. None of his men looked particularly heartened by the news, yet they accepted it. They, too, were men of duty. Within the hour, Davos Seaworth himself emerged to guide Ned's small band out of Stannis's lines. He was a humble-looking man, plain clothes beneath a boiled leather vest, a short gray beard, and eyes that seemed kindly if tired. Davos approached Ned with a small bow. Lord Stark, I'll take you by the best route to circle the city and approach Renly's forces. Ned inclined his head. Ser Davos. It's been a long road since Storm's End. You have my thanks for this. Davos gave a rueful smile. I only wish there was more I could do. King Stannis, he hesitated over the word, though with a sort of loyalty behind it, believes in duty above all. But I fear duty alone won't mend this rift. Still, if anyone can speak sense into Renly, it might be you. They set off through the ranks, the muddy ground sucking at the hooves of the horses, weaving around piles of crates and barrels. The men of Stannis's camp watched them pass in silence, some exchanging uncertain looks. It was no secret that Eddard Stark had tried once to bring peace between the brothers. Now, with the entire city in mortal peril, that sense of fragile tension could snap at any moment. Before long, they passed beyond the ring of outposts and onto a half-hidden path that circled inland, keeping them out of direct view of King's Landing's battlements. Davos led with care, pointing out vantage points where Lannister scouts or archers might lurk, as well as stretches of ground rumored to be trapped or patrolled by Renly's outriders. He spoke little, and Ned suspected the man was troubled by more than the immediate dangers. Perhaps it was knowledge of the Red Priestess's hold over Stannis or dread of the war itself. The Onion Knight had never seemed eager for bloodshed. He had done his duty in the siege of Storm's End, once delivering onions and salt fish that saved Stannis's men from starvation. For that, Stannis had knighted him but also taken his fingertips to punish him for smuggling in earlier days. Such was the nature of the man, rigid, unflinching, granting justice without mercy. Davos must have understood that if a man like Stannis believed unwaveringly in his cause, little could dissuade him. At twilight, they paused to rest near a ruined sept, an abandoned place of worship. The roof had collapsed, the stained glass windows shattered. The pungent smell of war hung in the air, burnt timbers, rotting refuse. Ned's men were silent as they ate hard bread and sipped water from flasks. Davos joined them. Before the gloom grew too thick, he rose. I should return before the watch is set. The lines tighten at night, and I don't want them to mistake me for an enemy. If you keep on this path another league, you'll see a small road leading west. Follow that, then turn south. You'll find yourself at the edge of Renly's pickets by midday tomorrow. Ned stood as well, offering his hand. Thank you, Ser Davos. Tell Lord Stannis I will do what I can. I only pray we won't see each other on a battlefield. Davos clasped Ned's hand, his face grave. You've a good heart, my lord, but this realm's kings aren't inclined to listen. Still, may the Seven guide you. He turned away, striding off into the growing night. Ned and his men found what shelter they could inside the remains of the September. The wind whistled through crumbling stone arches. A broken statue of the father lay on its side, face chipped beyond recognition. Ned tried to snatch a few hours' sleep but found only fitful dozing. His mind churned with images, the black fortress of Storm's End under siege, the shining armor of Renly's knights, the red priestess whispering of fire and shadows, the cold terror beyond the wall. It felt as if he were a lone man standing in a storm, trying to hold back the wind with nothing but words. When dawn broke, pale and wan, they resumed their journey along the route Davos had described. The hours passed in a haze of cautious travel. Twice they spotted mounted troops in the distance and took cover behind thick copses of trees, uncertain whether they were Lannister outriders or Renly scouts. By mid-morning, they began to see small clusters of green banners staked in the fields, a sign that they were entering the periphery of Renly's territory. The golden rose of House Tyrell fluttered in the breeze, accompanied by the crowned stag that Renly claimed as his personal sigil. Unlike Stannis's stark black banner, Renly's colors were bright and shining, as though to proclaim a more generous rule. Yet the swords behind those banners were no less deadly. Around midday, a patrol of a dozen riders emerged, brandishing spears. They wore Tyrell livery, green and gold. Their leader, a tall knight with an ornamental crest of bright plumage, called out, "Halt! Who comes into King Renly's camp unannounced?" Ned raised his voice. "I am Eddard Stark of Winterfell, here to speak with your king on matters of great importance." He saw them exchange looks of surprise. They clearly recognized his name, but war made everyone cautious. The knight lowered his spear, though not by much. "Lord Stark? You're a long way from the north. Wait here while I send word." Ned waited calmly, keeping his hands visible. His men followed suit. One of the Tyrell riders galloped off, presumably back to the main camp. The tension hung thick in the midday heat. Ned studied the area. Rolling hills, a few small woodlets, the distant glimmer of the Blackwater. He saw the tower spires of King's Landing, still distant to the east. Had the fighting started? Was the city in flames? No new smoke stained the sky. It might mean that both armies remained stalemated or that a fresh crisis had erupted behind the walls. Only time would tell. After a tense wait, the scout returned with a rider in fine armor, clearly a highborn retainer. "My lord, King Renly grants you audience. You and your men will be escorted. We ask that you surrender your weapons until you've spoken your piece." Ned hesitated, but saw no other choice. He nodded. "We mean no harm. We'll yield our steel for the time being." He removed his sword and passed it to the Tyrell knight, ignoring the uneasy muttering from some of his own men. The others followed suit, albeit reluctantly. They still had daggers hidden in boots or beneath cloaks, but it was wise not to provoke a host who vastly outnumbered them. Thus disarmed, Ned's group followed the Tyrell riders along a dirt road that snaked around a gently sloping ridge. Rounding the bend, Ned glimpsed a sight reminiscent of Bitterbridge, only much larger, a sea of tents arrayed across fields and meadows, bright with banners of House Tyrell, House Baratheon, in green, not black, and smaller sigils from lords all across the Reach and the Stormlands. It was impressive if daunting. Scores of men bustled about, knights polishing armor, squires running errands, cooks stirring steaming cauldrons. Grooms led high-bred horses to water troughs. The air rang with the clang of blacksmiths at their anvils. Amid it all, there was an undercurrent of tension no amount of chivalric pageantry could dispel. Renly's command tents lay near the center of the encampment around a cleared space used for jousting or drilling men-at-arms. A wooden platform stood off to one side, perhaps used for speeches or mustering. When Ned and his escort arrived, a group of knights parted to admit them into the largest tent. It was a grand pavilion, dyed a deep green with gold trim, the sea. Roan stag emblazoned across the entry flaps. Outside, 2 knights in gilded plates stood as sentinels, their armor polished to a mirror shine. They looked at Ned, measuring him, then stepped aside. The interior of Renly's pavilion was lavishly appointed, in stark contrast to the grim austerity of Stannis's war rooms. Rich carpets covered the ground, heavy brocade hangings framed the walls, and braziers glowed with scented coals. Renly Baratheon stood at the center, clad in glittering plate that seemed more suited to a tourney than a battlefield. His cloak was pinned with a stag-shaped brooch fashioned from gold, set with emeralds. Seated nearby was Ser Loras Tyrell, still youthful and impossibly handsome in his silvered armor, while other Reach lords hovered at a respectful distance. Renly turned as Ned entered, dark eyes widening. Then he smiled, though tension pulled at his mouth. "Lord Stark. Again, you surprise me. When last I saw you, you were off to do the impossible, to reconcile me with my brother." Ned bowed his head. "Your Grace. I have come from Stannis's camp." At once the atmosphere grew taut. One of the Tyrell bannermen muttered under his breath, and Ser Loras gave Ned a wary look. Renly lifted a hand, silencing them. "You have come from Stannis, bearing what? Threats? Demands?" Ned looked Renly squarely in the eye. "None of those. Only words, Your Grace. Lord Stannis, King Stannis, understands that a conflict between you will weaken both your causes and give the Lannisters the advantage. I beg you, if you cannot make peace for your own sake, then do it for the good of the realm." Renly's smile turned bitter. "The good of the realm. It's what I've heard from every corner since I donned this crown. How I must do this or that to save the realm. Yet all around me I see only men who want to preserve their own privileges. My brother is no different. He demands that I kneel, that I yield my claim. But you have met him, has he offered anything else?" Ned forced a breath. "He says if you bend the knee, you may keep Storm's End, perhaps more. He only demands recognition of his right as Robert's heir." Renly snorted. "Generous indeed, that I might keep the very castle I was born to so long as I call him king. My father was no king, but if he had known how Stannis would treat me, he might have changed a few things in his will." He let out a frustrated sigh, then flicked his gaze at the lords around him. "I did not crown myself for mere ambition, Lord Stark. The realm needs a king who can inspire the fealty of his bannermen, who can rule with a steady hand. Look at the chaos Joffrey's reign has brought. Look at my brother's stern rule at Dragonstone. Would men truly flock to him in the thousands? They do so for me. That is the mark of a true king." Ned recalled how Stannis had described Renly's popularity as shallow. Still, there was truth to Renly's claim. Men did rally to him. Even the Tyrells, a great and powerful house, had staked everything on Renly. He weighed his words carefully. "I do not doubt you have the hearts of many, Your Grace. Yet I must warn you, if you fight Stannis here, with the Lannisters behind the walls, you risk a 3-sided conflict. Tywin Lannister is rumored to march from the west. The city is well defended. If you attack, you might break upon those walls. Then Stannis swoops in, or the Lannisters break out. Thousands will die." Renly's lips twisted. "That is the nature of war, Lord Stark. Robert did not secure the realm by offering half measures. He won it with steel and cunning. Will you counsel me to simply depart? Return to Highgarden? That would leave the Lannisters triumphant, with Stannis nipping at my heels. No. I must see this through. I have an advantage and I will use it." Ser Loras murmured agreement, leaning forward. "We have the largest host, my lord. The city quakes at the sight of our banners. We should press the advantage before Stannis can bring his fleet fully to bear." Renly nodded. "Precisely." Then he turned to Ned again. "I honor the fact that you've come so far, Ned. I do not forget that you served as Robert's hand with honesty, some would say with too much honesty. But I cannot bend before Stannis. Not when I have the might to seize the city first. If he chooses to stand aside to let me dethrone the Lannisters, then perhaps we can talk. If not, I will meet him in open battle." Ned's heart sank. "That is precisely what Stannis fears you will say. And so he steels himself to oppose you if you make any move on the city. Both of you are locked in place, each afraid the other will exploit any moment of weakness." He looked around at the assembled lords, many of them wearing the bright sigils of the Reach, oak leaves, grape clusters, golden roses. "You do not understand how precarious this is. If you do not unite, the cost in lives will be staggering. The Lannisters would be left stronger for it." Renly's mouth tightened. "A pox on the Lannisters. I have my own grievance with that house, especially the boy king's mother. Their time is done. If Stannis truly wants to serve the realm, let him come to my side. Let him name me the rightful king, and I will embrace him as my hand. He would do well in that role. But no, he insists on the crown. There's no bridging that divide. Ned drew in a slow breath, glancing at the floor. Then, is there nothing that could sway you? If Stannis offered equal rule, a co-regency, or recognized your children as heirs? If he promised something? It would not work. Renly cut him off, though not without regret. We would only war again once the throne was claimed in name. Our realm has never had two kings. We would be asking for civil war to sprout anew. Better to have one king now at the moment of crisis. I aim to be that king. And I believe you, Lord Stark, once recognized me as such, did you not? His eyes were searching. Ned bowed his head. The memory burned. When Ned was still in King's Landing after Robert's death, Renly had asked him to seize Cersei and Joffrey, to place himself as protector until Robert's child came of age, or until Renly himself was crowned. Ned had refused that path, believing in the law. Now the law was tearing the realm apart. I named Stannis rightful heir then, because I believed Joffrey illegitimate, Ned said. I still do, but that does not mean I cannot see the realm's need for unity more than ever. This war, with two kings of House Baratheon, will ruin us. A tension-laden hush followed. Renly's lords peered at Ned warily. Finally, Renly exhaled, stepping back. I respect your honesty, Ned. My door is open if Stannis changes his mind. But I suspect you will find him as unyielding as before. You have tried, and I thank you. But now I must prepare for what lies ahead. The city will not conquer itself. He gave a sad, faint smile. You may remain in my camp if you wish, or travel on. But the war will begin soon, I fear. Ned felt a surge of helplessness. Again he had tried. Again he had been rebuffed. Only this time, the men in the pavilion clearly intended to move forward with an assault. The golden armor, the lines of supply, they were readying themselves. Thank you, your grace, Ned managed. I will remain a day, if you'll allow it, and see if anything changes. Renly nodded, and so the audience ended. Ser Loras guided Ned out of the tent, summoning a steward to return Ned's sword and lead him and his men to an area where they might pitch their own tents. The day was bright, but Ned felt no warmth in it. He settled his men near the edge of the sprawling encampment. The ground churned into mud by so many thousands of boots and hooves. Many of his companions, loyal men from the north, asked quietly what they were to do. Should they declare for Renly, for Stannis? Should they remain neutral? Ned could only shake his head. We will not fight our fellow men if we can avoid it. We wait. If the city falls quickly, perhaps we can push for negotiations again. If Stannis arrives in force, we may have one last chance to reconcile them. We stand aside, for now. He knew it was a frail plan. Men were not likely to pause mid-battle to sign a peace. But the alternative, declaring for one side or the other, would only drag the North deeper into war. And with winter and the others looming, the thought churned like a sickness in his gut. Evening found Ned pacing near the cookfires. The bustle of the camp around him reminded him of Robert's rebellion, but that war had clarity, a singular cause, at least from Ned's vantage. This war was a confusing tangle of claims, ambitions, and old grudges. At times, the swirl of confusion made him yearn for Winterfell more keenly than ever. He thought of Catelyn, of Robb, of his daughters. He was here, alone, trying to hold the realm together with pleas and reason. He forced himself to remain calm. One day. Then perhaps he would cross the lines again, attempt one last parley with Stannis, or even send envoys to the Lannisters, improbable as that sounded. He was so lost in thought that he barely noticed the approach of a woman in a pale green cloak, flanked by two of Renly's guards. She carried a small lantern. As she neared, Ned recognized her, Margaery Tyrell, Renly's queen by recent marriage, sister to Ser Loras. She was young, with brown eyes that shone with intelligence, and though she wore a modest gown in the Tyrell colors, she carried herself with the poise of a high-born lady well accustomed to courtly life. Ned bowed as she drew close. Your Grace, he said quietly, taking note of the guards behind her. She inclined her head. Lord Stark. My husband, she hesitated slightly, but pressed on. King Renly suggested I speak with you. He believes you may be more inclined to honest conversation with me than with some of his lords. May we talk? Ned gestured to a small patch of ground near the cook fire, though he waved away some of his men so they might have privacy. The queen nodded and handed her lantern to one guard, stepping closer, the small flames from the fire dancing across her face. I know you have come to see if a reconciliation is possible, she began, her voice soft yet steady. You and I both yearn to protect the realm from further strife. Yes, Ned admitted. I fear we stand on the brink. Once blood is shed, it will be much harder to stop the fighting. Marjorie folded her hands. She looked fragile, but Ned sensed a keen mind behind those soft eyes. My Lord Father Mace Tyrell has placed all his strength behind Renly. We truly believe he will make a good king, loved by the people, unafraid of the Lannisters. If the city falls swiftly, we might avoid a drawn-out siege. And yet, I am not blind to the danger. Stannis' fleet waits and King's Landing is well defended. Ned nodded. Exactly my fear. The city's walls won't yield easily and the Lannisters will cling to power with every resource they have. Meanwhile, Stannis may decide that the moment you breach the gates, he can strike. Or Renly will wait for a sign of weakness to launch his own attack if Stannis goes first. Marjorie studied Ned's face. Is there truly no chance that Stannis will yield the crown? Ned sighed. I have spoken with him at length. He holds the law above all, and the law supports him as Robert's true heir. Your husband's popularity is not enough to convince Stannis to kneel. Nor is the threat of war. He sees it as inevitable. She glanced away, her expression troubled. Then a great many men will die. This realm has bled enough already. After a pause, she looked back to Ned, eyes bright with a quiet urgency. Tell me truthfully, my lord, if Renly were to delay his assault, do you believe Stannis would agree to a truce? A short one, simply to negotiate or plan a joint assault on the Lannisters. Ned remembered Stannis' words. If Renly yields, I will incorporate him into my councils. But that was not a truce. That was complete surrender. Your Grace, I wish I could say yes. But I suspect a mere truce is not enough for Stannis unless your husband acknowledges Stannis' right to the throne. That he will not do. Marjorie chewed her lip thoughtfully. This is what I feared. Renly will not kneel, Stannis will not compromise. So we charge forward or we wait for Stannis to strike first. Either path leads to carnage. Ned hesitated, then ventured, unless there is a different arrangement. Could you and Renly accept that the city might be taken by force, but that once Joffrey is removed, we hold a great council to decide the rightful king? A gathering of all high lords, perhaps including delegates from the Night's Watch, from Dorne, from the Vale. If all swear to abide by the council's decision, that might avert civil war. It worked to seek King Aegon 3 centuries ago or to settle disputes in the Targaryen line. Let the realm's highest lords choose between Renly and Stannis once Joffrey is deposed. That would be more binding than either brother simply proclaiming himself the victor. Marjorie was silent for a long moment, considering. A great council. My lord father might support such a notion if it guaranteed Renly's fair chance. But my husband sees himself as the rightful king already. Would he agree that lords loyal to Stannis might sway the vote? She laughed softly, but it was a hollow sound. He might worry about stacked odds. Stannis might feel the same about Tyrell influence. Gods, it's a tangle. Ned gazed into the embers of the fire. Every path is fraught with mistrust. But a great council might at least slow the rush to slaughter. And who knows, there might be some arrangement, such as a betrothal or distribution of lands, that persuades one side or the other. Or perhaps a compromise involving a single generation. That is how the realm once overcame the Great Council's decisions in the past, through marriage alliances, concessions. She nodded slowly, though a shadow of doubt flickered across her features. I will speak to my husband. If there is any possibility that a pause might lead to a greater solution, I will urge him to consider it. And yet, she added, her voice dropping, he is surrounded by lords who thirst for glory. They believe a swift victory will secure their fortunes. Ser Loras believes in him wholeheartedly. They all do. None of them will wish to yield an advantage for the sake of talk. Ned sighed. I understand. Still, the advantage is not so great as they think. King's Landing is a formidable seat. And if Stannis attacks Renly from behind at the crucial moment, all the advantage in the world may turn to dust. Marjorie extended a hand, gently touching Ned's forearm. Thank you for your counsel, Lord Stark. I see why Robert named you Hand. You are a man of foresight and caution, and your devotion to the well-being of the realm is commendable. I promise I will try. You have my word on that. He covered her hand lightly with his own, grateful for even that sliver of hope. Thank you, Your Grace. I pray the gods guide us all. She withdrew, summoning her guards. As she slipped away into the darkness, Ned reflected that Marjorie Tyrell was more astute than she might appear. Perhaps she would have some influence over Renly, enough to buy time or open a path for a negotiated settlement. It was a frail hope, like a lone candle in a cavern, but Ned needed every spark in these dark days. That night, he slept only in snatches, half expecting the horns of battle to sound at any moment. He heard distant shouting once, but it turned out only to be a brawl among a few drunken soldiers. Dawn came with a light drizzle, turning the camp roads into ribbons of mud. Horses whickered irritably, knights cursed at the sky, and quartermasters barked orders at bleary-eyed men. Ned rose stiff and sore. He found a corner of the mess lines to sip a thin broth, ignoring the curious looks from men wearing the stag anros. His own men, equally subdued, broke their fast on bread and cheese, always with an eye on how quickly they could pack up and ride if trouble brewed. He was gathering his gear when an unexpected visitor arrived, Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, resplendent in silver mail chased with gold. Drizzle beaded on the polished surface. "Lord Stark," Loras said, voice clipped but polite. "His Grace summons you." Ned's heart quickened. Perhaps Marjorie had done some good. "Lead on." They made their way through the camp to a large drill yard of trampled grass. A ring of watchers had formed. At first, Ned thought some kind of demonstration was underway, knights practicing justs or sword work. Then he realized Renly himself stood in the center, fully armored, though he wore no helm. Marjorie was nearby, under a canopy with several lords and ladies. The king's face was taut, as though set in grim determination. Ser Loras guided Ned close. Renly beckoned, his voice carrying over the drizzle. "Lord Stark, stand with me a moment." Ned came forward. A hush fell on the watchers. Renly put a hand on Ned's shoulder, an almost theatrical gesture. "I have been counseled to offer Stannis one final chance at truce. But not on his terms. On mine." He drew a breath. "If he halts his approach, if he acknowledges me as the rightful king, I will name him my hand. Together we will dethrone Joffrey. I will even confirm him as Lord of Dragonstone, perhaps of the Stormlands as well. But the crown is mine. That is final." Ned swallowed, thinking how Stannis would balk at the notion of kneeling. "Your Grace, you know Stannis." Renly's voice rose, cutting him off. "I do. But I will make this offer publicly, so no man can say I refuse to negotiate. You, Ned Stark, will carry the message as a neutral party. Then we will see if Stannis truly cares for the good of the realm or only for his own pride." Murmuring spread among the assembled. Marjorie watched, hands clasped, her face unreadable. Ser Loras stood by her side, a gentle hand on her arm. Some of Renly's other lords seemed dissatisfied, not wanting to give even that much. But none spoke openly against the king. Ned bowed his head slowly. "I will do as you ask, Your Grace. I only caution you that Stannis sees the matter differently. He believes the crown is his by right, not by popular support." Renly shrugged, as if that mattered little. "He can cling to that in his lonely tower, or he can join me here with the largest army in the realm." Then he lifted his voice to the crowd. "Hear me. I, Renly Baratheon, by right of conquest and the voice of the people, do hereby offer my elder brother, Stannis of House Baratheon, a chance to serve as hand of the king with full honors and domains. Let none say I neglected brotherly affection." Then, in a quieter tone to Ned, he said, "Ride swiftly. If he refuses this final chance, I march on the morrow." That was the end of it. Renly turned away, removing his gauntlets and tossing them to a waiting squire. Loras shepherded him from the field while the onlookers whispered among themselves. Marjorie caught Ned's eye for a moment, nodding in silent encouragement, then followed her husband. Within moments, Ned found himself alone in a ring of watchers who melted away, resuming their tasks as if they had witnessed just another piece of war camp theater. Ned let out a slow breath. A public offer made more to prove Renly's sense of magnanimity than from any real willingness to compromise. Still, it was something. Another thread to grasp, however flimsy. Without wasting time, Ned returned to his camp and rallied his men. They would ride out at once for Stannis' lines. Maybe, just maybe, if Stannis recognized the danger of a three-way war, he would accept a lesser title, for now, and preserve House Baratheon's strength. The rain-slick roads turned the journey into a miserable slog. Mud caked the horses, and Ned's men muttered as they slipped on the treacherous ground. Once again, they skirted around the city, glimpsing the walls of King's Landing through the veil of drizzle. No large-scale assault seemed to have begun, though occasional horns or shouted commands drifted across the damp air. Twice, Ned's party encountered small skirmishes, scouting parties from Stannis' side clashing with outriders loyal to Renly. Both times, Ned's group made sure to give them a wide berth, letting the combatants peel away from each other once their cursory raids were done. Even as he tried to bring the kings to peace, the seeds of war sprouted in every corner. By dusk, Ned reached a perimeter picket of Stannis' main encampment. After announcing himself, he was brought under guard to Stannis' command tent. The watchfires hissed and sputtered in the damp. Soldiers huddled under oilskin cloaks to escape the worst of the drizzle. Inside the tent, Ned found Stannis studying a large map flanked by Melisandre and Davos Seaworth. The older Baratheon looked up, his face streaked with fatigue. "You return, Ned Stark. What does my brother say?" Stannis asked, voice curt. "Speak quickly, the weather is foul and so is my temper." Ned took a breath. "He has made you an offer. He will name you his hand, confirm you as Lord of Dragonstone and possibly the Stormlands if you bend the knee and acknowledge him as king. He says he will depart for the city in the morning unless you agree. If you refuse, conflict will be inevitable." A silence so thick Ned thought he could hear the slow drip of water from a corner of the canvas. Stannis' face tightened, lips drawing into a thin line. He would have me, the rightful heir, kneel at his feet and accept a parcel of what is already mine? His voice was cold. Then he barked a humorless laugh. "He insults me again and calls it generosity." Melisandre's eyes narrowed, a spark of anger flickering in the depths. He would dare place the true king beneath him. The Lord of Light shall not suffer such blasphemy. Davos looked pained, glancing at Ned. "It is at least an invitation to avoid battle, your grace," he ventured, though his tone lacked conviction. Stannis slammed a fist on the map table. "Avoid battle? By giving up everything I stand for? No. I will not kneel to that boy. He is no rightful king. The crown belongs to me by all the laws of gods and men." Ned's shoulders sagged. "My lord, if you fight your brother, neither of you will be strong enough to break the Lannisters quickly. Then the war drags on. The realm bleeds. The others march. Is pride worth all that?" Stannis' jaw worked, tension visible in every muscle. "I do not see it as pride. It is duty. If I yield, I commit a crime against justice. The realm cannot be stable if the rightful claim is cast aside. The lords may rally to him now, but such loyalty is fleeting. We saw how easily men turned on Ares when Robert rose. They will do the same to Renly in time." Ned forced calm. "I understand your reasoning, my lord. But if you two do not unite, the realm will break further, and the Lannisters might outlast you both." Stannis' eyes were like chips of flint. "If Renly stands aside, I would welcome him. I would even restore him as my heir if I perish without issue. But he must acknowledge me. I am the elder brother." He looked at Davos. "Send word to the ships. Tell them to make ready. If Renly advances on the city, so shall we. We will not allow him to seize King's Landing. He does not wear the rightful crown." Melisandre smiled as though something in this plan pleased her. Ned realized with a chill that the Red Priestess likely had her own designs for how this war should go, guided by her visions in the flames. She might even see Renly as a false prophet needing removal. He recalled dark rumors he had heard, that she wielded strange powers, that she had conjured shadows. But he had no proof and there was no time to dwell on it now. Ned tried one last time. "A great council, call one together after the Lannisters are dethroned. You both remain outside the city until Joffrey is removed. Let the High Lords choose who should rule. At least consider it." Stannis pressed his palms flat on the table. "I considered it once. But such a council would be swayed by whomever arrives with the larger army. There would be bribes, intrigues, deals brokered in smoky corners. No, Ned. The Seven Kingdoms are not so easily governed. Honor does not endure in such bargains." Melisandre's voice slid into the conversation like a serpent. "The flames have spoken. The Iron Throne belongs to you, my king. Renly stands in the way of destiny. If he refuses to step aside, the Lord of Light shall sweep him away as easily as smoke on the wind." A chill trickled down Ned's spine. "Don't do anything rash," he cautioned. "Renly is still your brother." Stannis only glowered. "He was my brother once. He is now my rival." He inclined his head at Ned, a dismissal. "You have done your part, Ned Stark. I will grant you safe passage if you wish to depart. But do not try to stop me. The hour draws near." Ned felt the final blow of defeat. Again, the same impasse. Two men unyielding. The seeds of war now fully rooted. "I see," he whispered. "Then I take my leave. I only pray that the realm survives this madness." He turned to go, stepping out into the cold, spitting rain. The sky was darkening rapidly, the watchfires casting flickering orange glows across the muddy ground. Men in Stannis' camp hurried about, preparing weapons, loading siege engines, stowing gear. The night was alive with the tension of an army on the cusp of marching. Ned's men found him near his horse, studying his face. He told them quietly, "We leave now. It seems there will be no peace." Stannis is resolved. They set off under the gloom of the storm, the wind tugging at their cloaks. Rain trickled down Ned's collar. He felt bone-weary, as though he had aged a decade in these few weeks. The realm was about to endure a violent collision. Yet part of Ned refused to accept that he had done all he could. There must be a final gambit, some last chance to stave off the worst carnage. The memory of Robert lying on his deathbed haunted him. Protect my children, protect the realm. Ned had tried to do so with honesty and law. Now he saw how easily it all unraveled if men chose pride over unity. As they rode away, he gazed back at the camp. The dim shape of Stannis's black stag banner whipped in the wind, edges wet with rain. No quarter, no mercy. Renly's bright standard soared on the other side of the city. And within those walls, Joffrey and Cersei lurked, preparing their own defenses with crossbows and wildfire if rumors were true. The entire region was a tinderbox waiting for the spark. Ned called a halt an hour later once they reached a small stand of trees that offered some shelter from the rain. His men gathered around him, shifting uncomfortably, chilled to the bone. One asked, "My lord, do we remain here in the Stormlands, or do we ride north? We're too few to sway any army." Ned rubbed his damp beard. "We stay a while longer. I must see if the city falls. If one side triumphs swiftly, we may yet attempt to broker some kind of resolution. If the Lannisters hold, though, or if the brothers destroy each other, the entire realm will be undone." He saw the exhaustion in their eyes, but also the loyalty. They would follow him, even if it meant wandering this war zone indefinitely. Ned crouched under the dripping branches, considering their next move. Perhaps they could hold somewhere near the Blackwater, watching the developments. If Renly's assault succeeded in a single stroke, the city might capitulate. Or if Stannis launched a naval attack at the same time, the fighting would be fierce but could end quickly. Yet Ned knew war rarely ended quickly. He tried to quell the dread that gnawed his insides. Instead, he focused on the immediate tasks, finding decent shelter, rotating watch shifts, scouting for better vantage points. If a great battle was to be joined, it would likely occur along the Blackwater Rush or at the city gates. Perhaps Ned could position himself on the high ground north of the city near the Kingswood to witness events but remain out of the fray. So they made a cold, wet camp. The night passed in miserable silence, save for the hiss of rainfall on foliage. Ned tossed and turned, haunted by dreams of a monstrous shape looming beyond the wall, an army of pale corpses drifting south while the living fought each other in vain. He woke before dawn, heart pounding, only to see a leaden sky still weeping rain. The war had not yet begun, or so it seemed. For how long? Ned roused his men and led them north and east, circling around the outskirts of both camps. He had no wish to be mistaken for a raiding party. By mid-morning, the rain eased to a fine drizzle. The land sloped upward, giving them a vantage over the rolling terrain around King's Landing. Thin beams of sunlight began to pierce the clouds. Ned and his men halted near an old watchtower, half crumbled, perched atop a rise. From there, they could see some distance. The city's walls in the southeast, the churned fields and roads below, and the distant shapes of armies. From that vantage point, Ned could not see the hustle within the walls, but he saw movement among Renly's lines. Tents collapsing, columns forming, banners drifting forward. The bright green of the Tyrell rose merged with the gold stag of Renly's personal sigils, an immense wave of color shifting across the field. Farther east, he thought he glimpsed Stannis's black and gold. If both armies advanced simultaneously, they might converge on the city. The hairs on the back of Ned's neck stood up. War was coming in earnest. He dismounted and climbed the rickety stairs of the watchtower's remains, ignoring the rot in the wood. From the upper level, little more than a half-broken platform, he squinted into the distance. His men had brought a battered Myrish lens, which he carefully used to peer at the armies. Though the lens was scuffed, it offered a better view than his naked eye. He saw glints of plate armor, siege towers being rolled forward, cavalry forming on the flanks. "Gods be good," he muttered. "They're truly doing it." "What do you see, my lord?" asked one of his men from below. Ned lowered the lens. "Renly moves on the city. Stannis readies on the southern bank, it seems, or perhaps on the eastern approach. They might strike from two directions, or they might turn on each other. I cannot tell." Hours passed in tense observation. The drizzle ceased, replaced by a cold, whipping wind that tugged at cloaks and rattled the old tower timbers. Ned ate a spare meal of dried meat and stale bread. Most of his men did the same, eyes flicking uneasily at the swirling activity below. The waiting felt interminable. Great battles often began with feints and maneuvers, each side testing the other. It was past midday when the first thunderous echoes reached Ned's ears. The sound of catapults or trebuchets hurling stone. He saw tiny figures along the city walls. Lannisters or gold cloaks returning fire. Smoke plumed in the distance. Renly's lines advanced methodically, large shields raised, siege towers creeping forward on squealing wooden wheels. The city responded with heavy bowshots, lumps of flaming pitch. Ned clenched his fists around the watchtower's broken railing. The siege had begun. For an hour, the watchers saw wave after wave of assault on the southwestern gate. Banners shifted in the wind. Men poured forward, and columns of smoke drifted overhead. He glimpsed a bright blaze. Wildfire, perhaps erupting near the city's outer defenses, sending up an eerie green flame. He heard a distant roar, screams carried on the wind. Another volley of stones arced from the siege lines. From the vantage point, it looked like a child's game, but in truth, hundreds of men must be dying down there. Suddenly, from the corner of his vision, Ned saw fresh movement on the river. Galleys, black-sailed, with the crowned stag of Stannis rowing up the Blackwater Bay inlet. They fired siege bolts at the city's harbor chain or the defenders on the wharf. The city responded with ballista shots. The crash of steel on wood echoed across the water. Ned's heart pounded. King's Landing was under full-scale assault from two sides. Stannis had not turned on Renly yet, nor had Renly turned on Stannis. They were both hitting the Lannisters, each determined to seize the spoils. Smoke thickened, tinted green in places. Ned guessed the Lannisters used wildfire to repel ships. Indeed, he saw one galley consumed in unnatural green flames, drifting aimlessly as men flung themselves overboard. Another rumbled explosion resounded, and Ned flinched at the spectacle. Even from this distance, the raw fury was evident. He hoped faintly that a swift collapse of the city's defenses might lead to a negotiation. But King's Landing was not some flimsy wooden palisade. The walls had been raised with stone and mortar centuries ago, reinforced under the Targaryen kings. The Lannisters would not cede easily, especially with Cersei's cunning and Tyrion Lannister rumored to be within, orchestrating defenses. A cry from one of Ned's men drew his attention to the southwestern gate. Large columns of Renly's infantry had forced part of the outer gates open. That caused a sudden press of battle. Arrows darkened the sky, siege towers lurched forward. But then a massive explosion of wildfire blossomed near the gatehouse. Even from the watchtower, Ned could feel the whoosh of air, see the swirl of sickly green flame. Men scattered, consumed in seconds. The watchers gasped. The battle lines wavered. Ned clutched the lens, peering, feeling ill at the thought of how many must be burning alive in that horrifying concoction. The scene was utter chaos. Renly's men tried to regroup, but the swirling plumes of fire forced them back. In the harbor, Stannis' galleys found themselves confronted by a row of Lannister warships that had been hidden upriver, perhaps a feint. The Lannisters unleashed flaming arrows soaked in wildfire, turning the water into a lethal trap. Galleys caught fire, men jumped into the Blackwater, only to drown beneath the weight of armor or burn on the surface. It was carnage. Ned turned away, sickened. This was precisely the nightmare he had tried to prevent, bloodshed and ruin while the realm's rightful protectors fought over who would wear a crown. Would the Lannisters stand victorious once the Baratheons wore each other out, or would one of the brothers triumph, battered yet unbowed? Meanwhile, winter crept closer. The afternoon wore on, a dreadful cacophony of distant screams, shouted commands, clashing steel, and the roar of fires. Ned saw a chunk of the city's wall crumble under repeated trebuchet bombardment, but the attackers were too disorganized to exploit it. He glimpsed glints of gold along the battlements, perhaps the King Guard or Lannister men fiercely defending the ramparts. He saw men in black and gold, Stannis' sigil, engaging in frantic boarding actions at the quay only to be driven back by waves of scorpion bolts. He saw Tyrell cavalry pinned by a hail of arrows. All the brilliance of Renly's knightly host was undone by the brutal reality of siege warfare. Twilight approached, the sky stained red by the setting sun and by the smoke of fires that now raged along parts of the city perimeter. Some of the sprawl of slums outside the walls had caught fire, sending a pall of black smoke overhead. Beneath that ominous sky, the armies fought on. Ned recognized the moment in which the attackers began to break off, exhausted, battered by the city's unyielding defenses. He saw ranks pulling back, forming rearguard lines. It seemed the day's assault had failed to breach King's Landing decisively. But then, as if to add a final twist, Ned spotted renewed movement on the southern flank, Stannis's men, lines of infantry pivoting not toward the city but to the west. He lifted the lens. Yes, they were facing Renly's flank. Had Stannis decided now was the moment to betray his brother's cause? Or had there been some prearranged plan? The swirling confusion made it hard to tell. Ned saw confusion in the ranks of Renly's men as well. They were retreating from the southwestern gate, trying to reform. Perhaps Stannis saw his brother's forces were vulnerable. Or maybe Renly had encroached on territory Stannis claimed. Either way, it looked like the two Baratheon hosts were turning upon each other. Banners shifted, cavalry spurred. The watchers from the tower gasped as they witnessed two pockets of gold and black colliding with the bright green of Tyrell banners. This was no minor misunderstanding. It was open battle between the two claimants to the throne on the outskirts of King's Landing, even as the Lannisters watched from behind their walls. Ned felt a hollowness in his chest. All his efforts undone in one moment of betrayal or misunderstanding. The lens shook in his hand. The shadows lengthened, making it even harder to see the carnage below. He glimpsed Renly's green-dyed cloak swirling amid the press, possibly with Ser Loras at his side. He saw the black stag banner of Stannis carried forward by a line of disciplined spearmen. Screams rose and fell in waves. Only one thing was certain: brother fought brother, and the realm was lost in blood. Darkness closed in, and the fighting lulled at last. Flickers of torchlight and campfires dotted the battlefield. The city walls still stood, battered but not conquered. Ned climbed down from the tower, shoulders slumped. His men looked at him anxiously. "My lord, what now?" Ned did not immediately answer. He sank onto a low stone, removing his gloves. "I must see if either side seeks terms or if the battle continues at dawn. There may be a lull in which we can attempt to rescue survivors or speak with the leaders. But it seems the worst has come." He looked up, face grimy with sweat and soot from drifting smoke. Stannis has turned on Renly or Renly on him. The Lannisters endure behind their walls. "I fear we are witnessing the realm's doom." His men shifted uneasily. One said, "We should remain out of sight, my lord. If they see us, they might think we serve the other side." Ned said, "We wait here until morning. Then we'll move cautiously, see if there is any chance to salvage something from this ruin." That night, they built a small, concealed fire in the lee of the old watchtower, warming themselves with Spartan rations. The distant flicker of flames along the battlefield cast a lurid glow in the sky. Nobody spoke much. The air was thick with the smell of char and death. Occasionally, the wind carried a faint cry or moan from the fields below. Sleep came fitfully once more. Ned was haunted by the swirl of images from the day, men engulfed in green wildfire, battered ships sinking in the bay, cavalry turning upon each other. He woke in the small hours to the sound of a horse whinnying in alarm. One of his watchmen reported seeing scattered groups of wounded or lost soldiers drifting aimlessly in the darkness. Some wore Renly's colors, others Stannis's. None seemed eager to fight further tonight. Dawn arrived, pale and bleak, the sky streaked with clouds that glowed faintly pink. Ned peered again from the tower platform. The battlefield below was a wasteland of broken siege equipment, scorched ground, and littered corpses. Thin trails of smoke still rose from the southwestern gate. The city walls loomed, battered but intact. It appeared that both Baratheon armies had withdrawn to form separate camps a few miles apart. Small skirmishes flared here and there, but no grand assault resumed. Ned came down, took a meager breakfast, then assembled half his men. "I will go down and see if I can speak to either side. The rest of you remain here, guard the tower. If I do not return by nightfall, ride north and inform my son Robb that the capital is lost to war." A hush fell at that. None of them liked the plan, but they saw no alternative. So Ned and a handful of riders descended, picking their way through the charred remains of the outer fields. The stench was indescribable: burnt flesh, rotting corpses, smashed siege wood soaked with gore. They saw survivors rummaging for water or salvageable equipment. Some stumbled about dazed, calling for comrades. Ned's men offered water where they could, but they dared not linger. Many of these wounded were too far gone to save. Ned's heart broke at the sight of them, men who had once served kings who were meant to be brothers. They traveled first toward what had been Renly's main line. A few skirmishers challenged them, but Ned raised a white scrap of cloth and announced himself as Eddard Stark, come in peace. Word was passed along, and soon they found themselves escorted through a dismal camp of men bandaging wounds, piling the dead in ghastly heaps. The green and gold banners hung limp, spattered with mud. A squire directed Ned to a large pavilion near a half-fallen tree, presumably Renly's new command post after the previous day's fiasco. There, Ned found a scene of tension. Renly stood with no crown, his armor dented and caked in dried blood. His expression was furious, though he tried to mask it. Marjorie stood beside him, face pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Ser Loras paced near them, a bandage on his left arm. When Renly saw Ned, he grimaced. "Stark," he muttered. "You see how my brother repays my assault on the Lannisters? We might have taken the city if not for his betrayal." Ned bowed stiffly. "Your Grace, I saw some of the battle from afar. Did Stannis truly strike first?" Renly's eyes flared. "He attacked my flank once the Lannisters used their wildfire. My men were regrouping, and he drove in hard, hoping to scatter us completely and claim the spoils. But we held at a cost." He waved an angry hand at the wounded all around. "Thousands lie dead. King's Landing stands. All thanks to Stannis." Ned closed his eyes briefly. So it was as he feared, the two Baratheons had turned on each other at the crucial hour. "Stannis claims you encroached on his lines, that your cavalry threatened his ships. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding, or perhaps it was malicious." Renly scoffed. "Misunderstanding? No. He wanted the city for himself once I battered down the gates. That was always his plan. He was content to let me take the brunt of the Lannisters' defense, then swoop in. But my men didn't fold so easily. We fought him off." His voice was thick with bitterness. Marjorie touched Renly's arm gently. "My lord, we must see if the city is open to parley now. Perhaps the Lannisters will treat. The cost in lives." "They'll never treat," Renly snapped, though not at her. "That wretched boy on the throne is no king. Only a lion's cub with sharpened claws. He'll be emboldened by our division. He might even sally forth if Tywin arrives from the west." Ser Loras cleared his throat. "We cannot remain here. Our supply lines were disrupted. If Stannis attacks again, we're vulnerable. The Tyrells will not stand idly if we lose half our strength in these fields." He glanced at Ned, his voice carrying a certain edge. "Unless you have some miracle to offer, Lord Stark." Ned had none. He felt the weight of this tragedy. "What will you do?" he asked Renly quietly. Renly exhaled, glancing around. "We must retreat, at least for now, to better ground. Tend our wounded. Perhaps regroup in the Stormlands or the Reach. The city is not ready to fall. The cost of continuing this siege is too high if Stannis remains a threat. We will wait for a more opportune time." The words tasted like ashes in his mouth, or so Ned guessed from the expression on his face. Marjorie looked torn. "Will you speak with Stannis again?" Renly let out a harsh laugh. "Speak? After what he's done? Not until I have an army at my back twice this size. Then he can beg my forgiveness. If he wants to talk, let him come crawling." He shifted, noticing Ned's dismay. "Lord Stark, you have seen how far words get us with my brother. Go, if you wish, to Stannis. Offer him my scorn. He deserves no more." Ned stood in silence, heart thudding. He understood Renly's anger. Men he valued had died, undone by a brutal betrayal in the midst of an already savage assault. Still, the realm needed them to reconcile somehow. But that chance seemed even more remote than before. "Your Grace, I am sorry," he said softly, though he knew how hollow it must sound. Renly turned away, barking orders to his knights to begin organizing a withdrawal. Marjorie gave Ned a sorrowful look, as though silently wishing for a better outcome, then moved to help calm the men. Ser Loras offered Ned only a curt nod, then followed. The entire pavilion dissolved into frantic planning. Ned realized there was nothing more he could do here. He stepped outside, ignoring the stares of wounded soldiers, and remounted. His men rode quietly beside him, weaving through the battered camp. Bodies lay under drenched blankets. A hush had settled over everything, aside from the groans of pain and the barked commands of captains. Morale was crushed. Once beyond the perimeter, Ned turned east, toward Stannis' lines. He had to know how the elder brother viewed the day's events. Perhaps, though he doubted it, Stannis might offer some path forward. They found Stannis' new camp a short distance away, also strewn with signs of savage fighting. Broken spears, fallen flags, lumps of churned earth. The men looked no less battered than Renly's. Pikes were lined up in ragged rows, swords stacked for cleaning. As before, Ned announced himself, was recognized, and escorted under guard to Stannis's presence. He found the elder Baratheon in a weather-beaten command tent, mud spattered across the entry. Inside, the atmosphere was equally grim. Stannis stood near a table wearing a dented breastplate. Blood stained his right gauntlet, though Ned couldn't say if it was his own. Davos was there, face creased in worry, along with a handful of surviving knights. Melisandre hovered to one side, her expression unreadable, those ruby eyes fixed on Stannis like a hawk watching prey. Stannis looked up. His eyes held a fierce, hollow light. "Ned Stark. You come to condemn me, I suppose." Ned didn't shy away. "What happened out there? You turned on Renly in the midst of attacking the Lannisters." Stannis's face hardened. "He and his cavalry threatened my flank. I had to respond. They would have cut off my approach to the bay. Or so I believed. In war, you cannot wait for the enemy to strike first. I took the initiative." Ned felt a surge of frustration. "Renly says you ambushed him. The result is plain. Neither of you won the city, and both armies have been mauled." Stannis's lips curled. "I do not regret removing some of Renly's illusions. He cannot prance about claiming the throne without consequence. As for the city, it's not over. We inflicted heavy losses on the Lannisters as well. Another day, perhaps we will take the walls." Davos spoke quietly. "Your Grace, our ships are shattered. A retreat might be prudent." Stannis glared at him. "Retreat? No. We remain close enough to maintain pressure. Renly is the one who must retreat if he still can. Let him run back to Highgarden with his pretty banners. I will stand firm." Ned could see the weariness etched in Davos's features. The elder Baratheon's stubbornness was unshaken even after the carnage. "My lord," Ned said carefully, "Renly indeed plans to withdraw. But that leaves the city in Lannister hands while your own men are in no condition for another major assault. The Lannisters may rally. Tywin might arrive with fresh levies. You could be caught between two forces." Stannis's gaze flicked to Melisandre, who offered a serene nod. "The flames show me victory yet to come," she said softly. "Your faith must not waver, my king." Ned stared at the Red Woman. It was faith enough that brought thousands to their deaths. "Are you so certain your visions are not influenced by your desire to see Stannis on the throne? Could they be misread?" She fixed him with a cool, confident stare. "I see what I see. The darkness in the north, the false stags that fall before the one true king. All must happen in due course." Stannis's voice rang with finality. "This is war. War is rarely quick or clean. Renly has chosen his path. I will not yield, nor will I flee. Let the Lannisters cower behind their walls. When next I strike, I will do so decisively." Ned realized it was a lost cause. Stannis would remain, battered though he was, while Renly marched away to lick his wounds, leaving King's Landing in Lannister hands for the moment. The realm was splintered beyond measure. Wearily, Ned bowed. "I have tried. The realm cannot endure this if it continues." Stannis held his gaze. "Then go, Ned Stark. Return to your north if you wish, or stay in these parts if you can stomach it. I do not ask for your fealty. I know you still cling to the notion that I might compromise with Renly. That is done." Davos lowered his eyes, not challenging the pronouncement. Melisandre's expression was one of quiet triumph, as though every step in this war was simply a stepping stone to Stannis's prophesied destiny. Ned saw no humanity in her words, only the cold glow of unwavering conviction. With no more to say, Ned departed once again. Outside, he stared at the wounded men in Stannis's camp. He recognized the same heartbreak and loss he had witnessed among Renly's soldiers. Two battered armies that had marched beneath a single crowned stag not so long ago. Now they had inflicted grievous harm upon each other, reaping only the bitterness of failure. Ned had no illusions that either side would forgive or forget soon. He rode off with his men, hearts heavy. The muddy fields stank of death. Carrion crows circled overhead. Somewhere beyond the walls, the Lannisters might be celebrating their reprieve, or licking their own wounds from the siege, though they remained in control of the capital. War had ravaged the Stormlands, the Crownlands, and might soon spread further if Tywin Lannister advanced. Meanwhile, the north was threatened by rumors of Ironborn raiders and the creeping chill of an early winter. The others loomed in the darkest corners of Ned's mind. They arrived at the watchtower again near dusk. The men who had stayed behind emerged at once, anxious for news. Ned told them plainly. Renly is withdrawing. Stannis remains. The city stands. Neither side is near agreement. One of the older retainers asked, Do we ride north, my lord? Ned hesitated. In the hush, the wind rustled the dead leaves. He said at last, his voice quiet. We have done all we can. Let the gods witness that we tried to reconcile them. War will claim many more lives, and the Lannisters still rule in the capital. There is no place here for us to do more good. The North needs us. He did not add that there might be some fleeting hope if the Baratheon brothers wore themselves down and eventually realized they must unite against the Lannisters or the others. But that realization might only come after tens of thousands more were dead. With sorrow, Ned conceded that he could no longer stop this war. He must see to the defense of his own homeland, to the wall, to the threat that Stannis and Renly had both ignored in favor of their crown. That night, he gathered quill and parchment, writing a series of letters to Robb, urging vigilance and readiness for a southern invasion or the Ironborn's aggression, to the Night's Watch, emphasizing the need for more men and more watchful eyes. He also wrote one final missive to both Renly and Stannis, though he doubted either would heed it. In the letters, he repeated his warning about the threat in the far north, begging them to remember that no matter how many crowns they forged, winter would come for them all if they did not unite. He sealed the letters with wax and the direwolf stamp. A rider would carry them at first light. At dawn, Ned and his company departed that watchtower. The battlefield behind them seemed like a grotesque reminder of all that he had failed to prevent. He led his men on the long road north, choosing lesser-known paths to avoid the worst chaos. Along the way, they encountered villagers fleeing the war, terrified peasants, and the occasional outrider from one side or another. But the main armies had fractured, each limping off to nurse wounds. Days stretched into weeks as Ned guided his weary band across the devastated riverlands, seeing again the imprint of war, fields burned, small folk huddled in fear. Word spread that Renly's host marched away, perhaps returning to the Reach. Stannis still lurked near the capital, but the city remained defiant and Tywin Lannister's forces were on the move. The War of the Five Kings had truly begun, and Ned Stark's dream of reconciling the Baratheon brothers had died on those bloody fields outside King's Landing. And so Eddard Stark pressed on, battered in spirit but holding firm to duty. If the living would not unite against the storms to come, he must do all in his power to protect the north. The wide forests and cold winds of home beckoned him now, a final sanctuary in a realm descending into anarchy. He prayed his children were safe, that Robb could keep the lords of the north prepared for what might soon descend from beyond the wall. He thought of the old stories, how in the darkest night the living had rallied as one. Would that happen again? Perhaps only once the dead were at their gates. In the end, the choice was not his to make. He had done what he could, traveled leagues upon leagues, spoken to every side, pleaded for reason. Pride, ambition, and destiny had proven stronger. Yet a small ember of hope flickered in Ned's chest as he urged his horse onward. Men could be blind until the hour was most dire, but sometimes at that final moment they found clarity and came together. If that hour came, he would be ready. Until then, he would guard the north with all his strength. He never forgot the sight of those two crowned stags turning their antlers against each other in the very shadow of the Lannisters' fortress. Two brothers who might have rescued the realm from chaos but chose war instead. Ned carried that memory home, a warning and a burden. In the quiet halls of Winterfell, should the gods grant him safe arrival, he would remember how close the realm had come to saving itself if only pride had not intervened. And he would steel himself for the inevitable day when the true darkness from beyond the wall came knocking, and all these petty crowns were shown to be as meaningless as dust on the wind.